Earlier this year, Congress passed something called the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023. The law requires the U.S. government to tell the public what it knows about the countless unidentified flying objects that have been spotted in the skies above Earth over the past 3,000 years. It's designed to be, and it very well could be, a transformative piece of legislation. And it comes at a time when we can finally say with confidence that the most unlikely sounding theories about UFOs are actually true. Yes, these things are real. They're not all weather balloons. They're not experimental aircraft from this or any other country. Whatever they are not of human origin, nor do they behave according to the laws of known physics. And yes, the US government currently has physical evidence that they exist. That means wreckage of the craft as well as the bodies of the beings that flew them. Amazingly, all of this is true. We know that from the detailed testimony, much of it under oath, from several high-level whistleblowers, including longtime intel officers Lou Elizondo and Dave Grush, both of whom we've talked to. But there have been many, about 10 so far. So the question is, now that the UAP Disclosure Act has passed, when can the rest of us see the information that we paid for and in fact own? Well, not so fast, it turns out. One of the great secrets of Washington, known to everyone inside Washington, is that many of the most powerful members of Congress do not work for their constituents, much less for the rest of us, for the country at large. They are instead puppets of the most secretive federal agencies. They are controlled effectively by the permanent bureaucracy, including through bribery and blackmail. Two such members happen to be especially powerful this term. They are Congressman Mike Rogers of Alabama, who is the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and Congressman Mike Turner of Ohio, who is chairman of the House Intel Committee. Both of these men have been instructed to violate, in letter and in spirit, federal law, and to hide the truth about UFOs from the American public. They're working to do that right now. It is infuriating to watch this. But if you think about it for a second, it's also baffling. Why is this happening? Federal agencies have been lying about UFOs for more than 80 years. This has been a coordinated effort. It is both highly time-consuming and very expensive. Many Americans have been hurt in the process. But why? What's the point of this? Wouldn't it be a lot easier just to release the facts? Now, the conventional explanation for why they haven't been released is that the US government is lying about UFOs because the truth about UFOs is too scary to reveal, that they're real, and our leaders wouldn't want to panic the population. But that's not true. In fact, it's ridiculous. Wouldn't want to terrify the population? Terrifying the population is what our government does best and most avidly. Officials regularly gin up irrational fears about COVID or white supremacy or Vladimir Putin or a dozen other topics as part of a pretty obvious control strategy. It's not like these people mind scaring you. They want to scare you, and they do it every day. So why would they lie about UFOs? Well, because they're covering up a crime, obviously, and it's their crime. Someday we'll discover what that crime is. But in the meantime, here are a few questions that honest lawmakers ought to be asking. Have government agencies used tax dollars to procure advanced non-human technology? If they have, where exactly is that technology now? Has it been used for profit? How exactly has the American public benefited from that technology? And then this question, the most pressing of all. Has the US government communicated directly with the beings that piloted these craft? Have American officials ever entered into any sort of agreement with them? And if so, what are the terms of that agreement? These are not random questions. They are informed questions. And at this point, Americans have a moral right to know the answers. One member of Congress who might be willing to ask those questions is Congressman Tim Burchett. He's a Republican from Knoxville. Burchett is one of the very few lawmakers in Washington who seems genuinely outraged by the cover-up in progress. Here he is the other day responding to it.
And I was told by leadership that it was blocked by the intelligence community, not the intelligence committee, but the intelligence community. And that is a very chilling effect. If someone can reach through the veil of government and pierce it to the point of we do not have access to something, you got to start asking yourself who the hell's in control. And I think it'd be wise for you all to start looking at some financial disclosures of some of those corporations, some of the people who do the stonewalling in this town. I want you to think about this. Think about this, that something with the capabilities of traveling light years, not showing a heat signature, and the energy capabilities of that, that would put the Pentagon out of business. We wouldn't be fighting these worthless wars overseas over oil, and American boys and girls wouldn't be dying. It would put the war pigs out of business, and they'd have to go somewhere else, and I'm all for that.
Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee joins us now. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on. So I think a lot of that clip speaks for itself, but you are saying effectively, as I hear you, if unelected bureaucrats and defense contractors can shut down a federal law, then it's not really a democracy, then is it?
No, it's not. And you're correct. They have been able to do that through their power and influence.
I'm really struck. There is some pushback against this. I think you've been the most visible and by far the most articulate. But there are some people who are bothered by this. But I've heard almost no discussion about why it's happening in the first place. Why the effort, the enormous effort to suborn the members of Congress, the committee chairman I mentioned, and the new Speaker of the House, and the Senate minority leader, why? Why go to the effort to hide information that most Americans think they already know and have accepted?
I think it's power, influence, corruption, money, all the things, that run Washington. Our Pentagon just recently failed their 6th audit in a row. They publicly disclosed that over half their assets are unaccounted for. Now, those assets are, their automobiles, their firearms, their, personnel, everything. 50%. Could you imagine anything else? And yet we've rewarded them with billions more this year for their incredible effort, and they're bragging about how well they're doing now. And so you figure, a compartmentalized department like the Pentagon, who has these untold billion-dollar contracts with our defense contractors who want us in every dadgum war, who want us in Ukraine, who want us in everything, everywhere in the world, and because they'll be selling more missile defense systems and things like that. You imagine that there's probably, I would say, a half a dozen of those top-level contractors and these corporations, multinational, and then we fund them, and we don't know where the money's going, and yet there's cost overruns, and we keep rewarding them with more. So obviously, if they were in possession of some of this material or a craft or what have you, the reverse engineering possibilities would be unlimited, and they don't want to. They can control the ebbs and flows of technology, and they're on the cutting edge of it, and they don't want us out of war because and imagine too, as I've stated before, if you had this energy source that didn't show a heat trail that could heat our homes, cool our homes in the summer, heat our homes in the winter. I mean, the Pentagon will be out of business. I think I called them war pigs, but I meant to say war pimps, I believe is the appropriate term.
I think both fit.
Yeah, I do too. I get a lot of controversy. I had a call from a high-ranking official told me one time that I probably needed to get bodies around me pretty soon after making those statements, and I said, well, I'm in Tennessee. I live in Tennessee. Anybody's out of place there, they'll know it pretty quick. But in all truthfulness, these groups, and they own these politicians, whether through the honeypot or just hiring family members or what have you. And I don't have any firsthand knowledge of that going on with any of those. But that seems to be what's done in the past, and it's all done legally. Most of it is now, and so you've got these situations, and they don't want to change it, and they've got somebody's ear. I had an old-time lobbyist. They called him the Golden Goose. When I was in the state legislature, he was the liquor lobbyist, and he'd smoke that big cigar, and he'd say, Burchett, he said, I don't need the governor, I don't need the House, the Senate, I just need one committee chairman. And, and that's the way it works. And unfortunately, we allow it to work when less than 20% of the population goes to the polls.
The stakes in this particular story seem pretty high, since the government has evidence that we're not alone in the universe, that there is some form of intelligent life or something that is creating these crafts. They're buzzing the Earth. We don't know if they're from outer space, or they're spiritual beings. I mean, we just don't know the answer. But the government does know, but they're lying about it because why? And so does it occur that maybe the billions of unaccounted Pentagon funds that you mentioned that turn up in every accounting process, that maybe that they're not lost through incompetence. Maybe those are attached to programs that we're not allowed to know about.
I completely think it's intentional, Tucker. You're exactly right, as usual. They've been lying about it since 1947. And then all of a sudden, we're going to pass legislation, and they're going to say, oh, well, we're going to come out and tell you the truth. I mean, this, Schumer's thing, everybody's on me because I'm not really sure about the Schumer amendment, because it basically is modeled after the Kennedy assassination files, and here we are 60 years later, and we haven't done that. I guess it's a good step forward, but the reality is we're going to tell them to tell us the truth after they've been lying to us, and they've been funding these programs. Lou Elizondo, for instance, the program that he was involved with for the longest period of time, they said it didn't exist, yet he shows up and he's got a department that works for him. And so, this thing has just been going on, like I said, at least since 1947. And we know it's been going on maybe before then at some point. It's a worldwide phenomena. We have some of the best pilots, not in East Tennessee, the best pilots in the world, that are telling me their crafts have been buzzed by this. And I've had members of Congress say, Burchett, we need to be on something important. Well, let me ask you, what's more important than something in our airspace buzzing $50, $60 million aircraft, putting American pilots at risk, and that we don't know who it is or what it is? And then we have a government that claims they don't exist, and now all of a sudden, people like yourself have brought this issue to the forefront. Over half the American public believes that they're out there. And now the Pentagon smells dollars, is what I think it is. That's why they're putting all this out. And each department, NASA and everybody else, has their little pamphlets out now of NASA's. I think it said something about we want to do robust research. Well, you know what robust research means. They want more of your tax dollars. I just want them to come forward with the truthful information that they've been hiding from us for decades.
Do we possess this technology or don't we? And if we do, where is it? And there have been, as noted earlier, a number of pretty ominous indications over the years from apparently informed people that the U.S. government has been in direct contact with these forces, whatever they are, the people who created and flew these objects, whatever they are. But there has been direct dialogue between the U.S. government, maybe other governments, and these entities. Are you aware of that? Has anyone even asked that question to, say, the President of the United States or someone else who could answer it?
I'm aware of it, and I've talked to people about it, but it's just another rabbit hole I go down. And I have to be real careful, Tucker, to be honest with you, because you would not believe the amount of research and things I've gotten poured on me from all over the world. People send me books and photographs and things, and of course, a lot of that is, I think it's fake, because they're trying to get me to embarrass me further, I guess, in this issue. But I'm not biting on all of it. I don't usually put any of it out, actually, just because I don't know if any of if it's truthful, or if it's a government entity putting this garbage out to discredit this community or what have you. But it's a complete it shows the mistrust the public has of our government, and for good reason.
Yeah, it's been well earned. So where is this legislation going? I mean, will there be disclosure short term? Will these two committee chairmen, the Speaker of the House, Mitch McConnell, will they shut it down?
Well, the Senate passed it, the amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, but it hasn't been signed into law yet. The House is in negotiations, from what I understand, over this amendment. I'll be talking to the Speaker today or tomorrow about this amendment and just telling him how important it is to this community and transparency. That's really all I want, is transparency. Where we're spending all this money on something, and where's it going? And why do they not trust the American public? Those are the things that people need to ask. You can, as I said at the hearing, I said, we're not going to bring in a UFO, we're not going to bring in little green men, but what we want is transparency. And unfortunately, we don't have much of that in the United States Congress, because look, there's another shiny object over here. They'll misdirect us over here, they'll misdirect us over there. But I believe this community is very, very in tune to what's going on and the cover-up that's been going on.
Yeah. I mean, if this is real, and it clearly is real, I mean, 10 people have come forward with security clearances to say, yes, it's real.
Well, the interesting thing about that was, you said 10, and that kind of jogged my memory. We asked more than 10 people to testify before our committee, and several of them were scared off. They were told by their overlords or whoever at the Pentagon that no, they could not come speak. And then the 3 that we got were dynamite, obviously, because that really lit the fuse. But But there's several more out there, and several more have come forward. And I was sent a text just as I was in here getting ready to come on your show from somebody else. But again, I have to be real careful with those because they get up there and embarrass the whole community. Then we're two steps back.
No, that's exactly right. And I think they've salted disinformation, lies throughout this story in order to discredit the people who tell it. Last question. You come out with a statement that we played at the beginning of this interview, pretty compelling, kind of hard to see what the counter argument is. What do your fellow members of Congress say to you about that? And what is the excuse that they give you to your face for not disclosing this information to the public?
Well, as I've stated many times, there's several members have come forward to me, some of them fairly prominent in both parties, that have actually seen something as a child or in the military or other things. I think now that their phone lines have been lit up, because the UFO community, if one thing, they are relentless, and they call and they're informed, and they call and some of them actually, they've called my office in support of me. And I always tell them, I appreciate it, but I'm good. Y'all need to get on with your own congressmen or your senators. And so they've made a great effort of that. And I believe now at Congress, even if they don't believe it, they're going to start looking into it because they know this group is well versed. And I'm glad of it because the thing that happened to me was they started this stuff, and sure enough, I get home and somebody's running a poll against me to figure out my weaknesses, and who do you think's doing that? So and I fully expect this to be an issue on the ballot next time. I mean, me being on the ballot as well, that would be they're going to be running that against me, but I don't think they're going to get anywhere with it because I think they're still driving around in their 72 Vegas and their blue leisure suits with their zip-up dingo boots listening to an 8-track tape player. I think they're a little bit behind the times right now.
Who do you think, I'm interested, who do you think did that? Who do you think's coming after your seat for your willingness to talk about this?
I think it's probably one of three people. I don't know, maybe any of those people that you mentioned, and there's some that there's others too. I mean, you figure they've got unlimited funds, and that's what scares me about the whole thing. They have unlimited funds where they could literally buy a seat in Congress, which I know that'd be naive of me to think that that's never happened in the past. But in Tennessee, we are fairly independent people, and that bothers me a great deal.
Well, it's just interesting, I mean, that they're willing to go to that effort. You'd think they say, oh, Burchett, he's crazy, he believes in UFOs. But they're very threatened by this, which tells you that they've got something to hide that implicates them. That's what I'm learning.
Absolutely. They're threatened because people like Tucker Carlson are adding an air of legitimacy to this thing, and they know that however millions of viewers that you have are watching this, and they're scratching their head, and then they're going home to their barbershops, and some guy who was in the Navy, who was on an aircraft carrier and saw something and was told by when they got back to port that some men in some suits said, hey, you didn't see anything. This is national security. You ever bring this up, you're going to the federal penitentiary and break rocks for the rest of your life. Those stories are coming out daily, and it's happening more and more. And so I think they're taking a step back now.
Well, I appreciate your bravery very much, Congressman Tim Burchett of Knoxville, Tennessee. Great to see you. Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Happy Monday. So here's a story from over the weekend. At about 5 a.m. on Saturday morning in Manhattan, a parking garage attendant called Musa Diarra noticed a man peering into parked cars looking for things to steal. Now, that's a familiar scene in New York City. Alvin Bragg, who is the local Soros-funded DA, has decided that prosecuting car burglaries is a form of white supremacy. As a result, not surprisingly, car burglaries have risen quite a bit. Musa Diarra, the attendant, is not white, but apparently he's sick of watching other people get robbed, so he told the man to get out, leave the garage. In response, the man pulled out a handgun and fired 4 times. He hit Diarra in the head and the stomach. It was a nightmare. But somehow, Musa Diarra had the presence of mind to wrestle the gun from the man and then fire back before the man could shoot him or anyone else. By the time police arrived, both men were lying on the sidewalk bleeding. Now, what do you think happened next? In a sane, self-respecting society, Moussa Diarra would have received a medal, if not a ticker tape parade. But in the city of New York, he was arrested and charged with attempted murder and illegal possession of a gun, the same gun that had been used to shoot him. Diarra woke up in Bellevue Hospital shackled to his bed. The New York Post ran this picture. It's of him sobbing. "I got bullets in me and I'm chained to a hospital bed," he said, "but I didn't do anything wrong." You can imagine his confusion. This was not the country he expected. And in fact, Moussa Diarra is exactly the kind of person you want more of in your country. He's 57 years old and he's still working harder than most young people do. In fact, when New York shut down during COVID, as lawyers and nonprofit executives hid in their apartments, living on DoorDash and stockpiling surgical masks from Amazon, Diarra went to work every day, like Americans used to. The man who shot him, by contrast, does not have a history of going to work every day. His name is Charles Rohde. We checked. He's got a rap sheet of nearly a dozen serious crimes that go back more than 20 years. And yet, as of Saturday at 5 a.m., he was not in jail. He was walking around New York with a gun looking for more things to steal. In the end, Alvin Bragg caved to public outrage, which was considerable, and dropped the charges against Moussa Diarra. But he had already made the point very clear to everyone. In our new Soros-inspired justice system, decent people are the criminals, while the criminals are now a protected class. Here's how it works. The people in charge unleash chaos in our cities, but if you dare to protect yourself or your family from that chaos, you wind up in handcuffs. What is this? Well, the name of this system of governance is anarcho-tyranny. You get state-sponsored anarchy accompanied by political tyranny. Since taking office, Bragg has done his best to increase the anarchy. He's increased the number of felony charges his office drops by nearly 40%. That includes almost half of all drunk driving charges. It's no longer really a crime to drive drunk in New York City. That's the anarchy part. But for those who step outside the political lines, it is tyranny. You'll remember the middle-aged bodega clerk called Jose Alba from the Dominican Republic. Bragg sent him to Rikers Island, one of the worst prisons in the world, for daring to defend himself against a lunatic who was trying to murder him. So now this very same system, the system that imprisoned Jose Alba and chained Moussa Diarra to his hospital bed, this Soros-inspired and backed system, is putting Joe Biden's main political opponent in the upcoming presidential race on trial for a crime that's not actually a crime. This is the political tyranny part of anarcho-tyranny. So for our existing legal system, this appears to be a point of no return. And you would think the media would point that out. Even if they support it, this is a big change from the way the country has run for hundreds of years. But no, because they're too dumb, too shallow, and above all, too self-interested. So Trump's upcoming arraignment tomorrow isn't a turning point in our country's legal system. It's yet another chance to follow Trump around in the hope that ratings will return. This was CNN all day today.
I'm being told right now that is Donald Trump leaving Mar-a-Lago on his way to catch his plane that will leave to New York, where he'll arrive later this afternoon. We're watching really history right now unfold on your screen. Donald Trump en route to the airport and a court date in New York, becoming the first ever former president to face a criminal indictment.
Look, this is a historic moment. We just watched the former president of the United States, or a former president of the United States, leave his home, headed to New York to be arraigned in court.
We're watching on our screen as Trump's motorcade has now arrived on the tarmac at Palm Beach International Airport.
Heading up in the air and heading back to his home state of New York. Certainly not the kind of homecoming that he had ever imagined when he went back from Florida to New York, but he is heading back on a historic flight. Again, not necessarily a part of history that Donald Trump or any former president would want to make. One of the things that we have learned is to not put everything at an 11, not make everything the biggest deal. This is a big deal.
Oh, this is a big deal. We get to talk over live pictures, what we were trained to do in local news. Well, it is a big deal, actually. It's a very, very big deal, but the guardrails are gone. No one in the media seems to be pointing out that this is a huge change in our entire legal system, And no one in the Democratic Party in Washington, even those who are a little bit concerned about where this might be heading, dares say anything at all because Alvin Bragg is, of course, a holy person and no one wants to speak out against the crowd on Twitter. So this is all happening in slow motion, and of course we're getting the dumbest possible lectures, as always, from cable news. We've learned not to put everything at 11. We're not making everything the biggest deal. It's hilarious. And of course they can't wait to make it the biggest deal on the shallowest possible level, and the reason is economic. Since Trump left office, CNN has lost more than 60% of its viewers. Now they're desperately trying to sell the channel because, like, it's tanking. So they have every incentive to sensationalize anything that Trump does, no matter what happens to the country in the process. So here you have a Soros-funded DA perp-walking a former president. What does this mean? What could Trump possibly be guilty of? They don't even tell you. All they tell their eager but small audience is the walls are closing in on career criminal Donald Trump. They're going to turn Trump's motorcade into OJ's Bronco because otherwise they're going to be out of a job because nobody watches them anymore. So that's a sober assessment of what's happening in this country. We're saying, look at the plane, look at the motorcade. Before long, outlets like CNN may be your only source of information about the trial. And that's the scary thing. Imagine a system where the person who's been charged is no longer allowed to defend himself. Oh, are you seeing the connection here? Like the parking garage attendant who was shot by a criminal, he gets arrested. Like Jose Alba, who tried to save his own life from a lunatic in his bodega, he gets arrested. The people who are the victims of the tyranny don't get to speak. CNN speaks for them. Imagine that. There are multiple reports tonight that Alvin Bragg's office will seek a gag order when Trump is arraigned. Now, that would prevent Trump, on pain of going to prison, from talking about his case in public. But CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and the Washington Post, all the completely filthy, corrupt liars in the media, handmaidens to power, they'll be able to say whatever they want. Because apparently their coverage doesn't influence the jury. Only the accused defending himself. Well, it's not only unconstitutional, baldly so, it's also completely immoral, and above all, in the middle of a presidential race, it's a subversion of democracy itself. The leading candidate from the other party doesn't get to talk, or you send him to prison? Wake up first. Where's Michael Beschloss on this? Where are all the august historians always telling us about, the architecture of our democracy, our democratic norms? Is that a democratic norm? Silencing the other party's main presidential candidate on pain of going to jail? But they like the power, and they're going to continue to exercise it until somebody stops them. Today, the mayor of New York City, a grave disappointment. We thought would be a good mayor, hasn't been a good mayor. It's sad. So to divert attention from his own ineptitude and the hours he spends in bars at night, he's now decided to become a political celebrity. So he's now threatening to jail a member of Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene, if she dares to protest Donald Trump's arraignment in a way that he doesn't like. Watch this.
While there may be some rabble-rousers thinking about coming to our city tomorrow, our message is clear and simple. Control yourselves. New York City is our home, not a playground for your misplaced anger. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is known to spread misinformation and hate speech, she stated she's coming to town. While you're in town, be on your best behavior. As always, we will not allow violence or vandalism of any kind. And if one is caught participating in any act of violence, they will be arrested and held accountable.
New York City's our home. That's why we let people crap on the sidewalk and hookers turn tricks in the vestibule of ATM machines. Really, it's your home? Your home is filthy. And you're incompetent. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was known to spread hate speech. Really, what's hate speech? Well, it's speech that certain politicians hate. That's all it is. There's no hate speech prescribed in the Constitution. That's completely made up. It's a power grab, of course. Politicians didn't used to dare to talk like this because someone would call them and say, whoa, slow down. We have a Bill of Rights. But those people are hiding. And like Michael Beschloss, they're too afraid to say what's obviously true, which is we're watching the system itself collapse. So you get to just jail a former president on some fake crime for a payment he made 7 years ago that was completely legal. Once you get to do that, well, you just can go after all your political enemies with the force of law. And that's what they're doing because no one's stopping them. Today, Fox News learned that Merrick Garland's DOJ is sending subpoenas to Trump's Secret Service agents as part of their probe into his handling of classified documents. Now, if there was ever a fake crime, it's this. Everyone who's ever served in federal office, from Hillary Clinton to Joe Biden to Mike Pence, has admitted to bringing home documents in violation of the law. We have 1 billion classified federal documents, probably 2% of which deserve to be classified. The whole system is rotten and corrupt, and everybody knows it. But they're using it in order to stop someone from running for president. Okay. Is that okay with the defenders of democracy? Then there's the grand jury forewoman in Georgia going on MSNBC saying we're investigating Trump for saying the wrong things about the 2020 election. So they want to take out Trump, but in a democratic system, you do that by convincing people to vote against him. In a tyrannical system, you use people with guns to stop him from running. And that's honestly exactly what we're seeing. And even if you don't like Trump and have no intention of voting for him in this next cycle, you should have the right to vote for him because that's democracy. And anyone who takes that right away from you is a tyrant and is presiding over a system that is not democratic, but totalitarian, obviously. So to assess all of this tonight, we are joined by Candace Owens, the host of Candace, and we're always happy to have her. Candace, thanks so much for coming on. It does seem like anarcho-tyranny was one of these ideas, you know, that some political philosopher thought up a long time ago, but I don't think it could be clearer that's what we're watching.
Absolutely. And I will say this about this cultural demise that we're facing. I know people are understandably outraged, people are understandably angry, but I also want to comment on just the overwhelming despair and sadness that all of this is making me feel. And I know that so many people at home are feeling the exact same way, not just about America's present, feeling bleak about the future, a dystopian nightmare that we're currently existing in, but also looking backward. You know, one of the things that I think a lot of us are feeling is disillusionment with what American justice is even about. We've spent the better half of the last century entering in other countries, saying that we have a right to be here because we're spreading quote-unquote democracy. Well, we've completely lost the moral high ground. I'm not sure if we ever really had it. We have a right to be in Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, because we have better, our principles are better, because these people are criminals, because these people are terrorists, because these people have the wrong ideas. Now, all of a sudden, our government is turning that same ideology against the American people, right? Exactly. Now, we have the wrong ideas. Now, we are the domestic terrorists. Now, we are the people that need to understand that criminality is allowed to fly. And so it's incredibly despairing, and I just want to speak on that first and foremost, you know, to look and say that overseas we used to talk about how these terrorists were locking up their political dissidents. Now we're doing exactly the same thing. We're locking up grandmas in the Capitol building. We're putting people in prison for years for the offense of trespassing. We are now locking up a political contender. You're saying Donald Trump must be arraigned. We can't tell you why, but we're going to issue a gag order. If any of this took place overseas, could you imagine what the response would be? We'd be demanding boots on the ground tomorrow to spread democracy. But here, they completely overlook it.
Calling attacks on the existing system hate speech, which is a completely fake and made-up category. If you eliminate free speech, you don't have democracy. Democracy requires free speech, or it doesn't exist. And we would know that if it were happening in a foreign country. You're so right. Candace, appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So it's almost hard to believe that the Republican Party's leading presidential candidate, as of tonight, by 30 points, could be told by a judge that he will go to jail if he dares to defend himself in his own criminal case. Could that actually happen? Well, it happened to Roger Stone, and nobody seemed to care. We did. No one else did. Roger Stone is a longtime Republican strategist, worked for Richard Nixon through the rest, up to and including Trump. Runs StoneZone.com, joins us tonight to assess this. Roger Stone, thanks so much for coming on. You're the first person we thought of because this happened to you. And I remember people saying, well, Roger Stone's a troublemaker. It's okay if he's not allowed to defend himself and CNN can attack him, but he can't fight back. Maybe this will awaken people to how immoral this is.
Look, I think the idea that they might gag Donald Trump is really a testimony to his effectiveness as a counterpuncher. He's used social media and his interviews to very effectively question the falsity of these charges, question the political motivations and funding of District Attorney Alvin Bragg, and to question the bias of this judge. But more importantly, not only do I think the gag order would be unconstitutional, nowhere does it say you lose your free speech rights if you're charged with a crime, but more importantly, it's election interference. He is a legal candidate for the 2024 Republican nomination. He's leading by closer to 40 points in the polls, and this is a very clear effort to try to break his momentum. You can see in the polls and in the money that he is raising that the stronger they hit him, the harder they hit him, the more his support grows. So I think canceling him now, gagging him now, is a reaction to the way he has rebounded and actually benefited from what is a naked partisan attack against him.
But to use the legal system to effect an attack like that is just beyond the pale in the beginning of the end. I remember when Judge Amy Berman Jackson, who's completely out of control, did this to you, and the pretext was, well, if you talk in your own defense in public, you could influence the jury. But she didn't gag CNN, which spent a year attacking you every day, or MSNBC or the New York Times. Like, this doesn't even make sense as a legal order.
Well, not only that, but she kept the gag order in my case in place after I was already convicted, after there was already a verdict. I would have gone to jail under a gag order if President Trump hadn't seen the unjustness and ridiculousness of the charges against me. By the way, there was never any evidence of Russian collusion, WikiLeaks collaboration, or any other crime, as Robert Mueller admitted in his final long redacted report. And those who say, well, the gag order would just be narrow, it would only relate to these charges are politically motivated. This is part of the campaign against Donald Trump.
Yeah, but if you can't speak in your own defense in public, and only your critics have the freedom of speech, I mean, at that point, darkness has descended, and I don't think it's an overstatement. Roger Stone, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
So the big and fundamental things matter. At the very top of that list is energy. The most valuable thing this country owns is our strategic petroleum reserve. Joe Biden has sold it, in part to China, so we need to refill it. Oh, that's a little harder than it looks. More on that next. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve may be the single most hard asset the U.S. government owns, and that's a concern when you consider it is now at its lowest level in 40 years. And that is true because the Biden administration has sent this oil to foreign countries, including China. The administration also released the oil to combat rising gas prices caused by inflation from its own policies. So it's a huge problem. Again, this is a hard asset owned by the U.S. government. Unlike the U.S. dollar, it will always have value, so we need to fill it up. But we may not be able to, and we can't because we don't make that much oil anymore. And the Saudis look like they're not swooping in to rescue us as they have so many times in the past because they have been completely alienated by the Biden administration. Saudi now says it's going to cut oil output by 500,000 barrels per day. Biden was just asked about this. It's not a big deal, he said. Brian Brenberg is the co-host of the Big Money Show on Fox Business. He joins us on this story tonight. Brian, thanks so much for coming on. Yep. This is one of those stories that people seem to be missing, but it seems to have inherent significance, Strategic Petroleum Reserve being, I think, the most valuable thing that we own. What do you think this means that the Saudis are not stepping up as they have before?
Well, the Biden administration did two things. On the one hand, they alienated Saudi Arabia, but worse, they handed Saudi Arabia all the leverage. Saudi Arabia is calling the shots on oil. We used to do that. Like 3 years ago, we would have decided where the price of oil is going to be in the world market. We don't anymore. Saudi Arabia does. So we're stuck. And the Biden administration, in the meantime, drained our strategic petroleum reserves. We can't dip into those. And the chance they had to fill it up again over the past few weeks, few months, they didn't do anything about it. So the bottom line is we are now taking what Saudi Arabia wants to give instead of making the decisions we need to make to keep people in America safe and secure and prosperous and get the economy going again. We've given it all up, Tucker.
I guess two quick things. One, have the people who decided to sell our strategic petroleum reserve to China been indicted or imprisoned? And two, why didn't someone tell Biden when he was running around saying we don't need fossil fuels that actually in the adult real-life world the rest of us live in, we have to have fossil fuels, period.
Well,
why didn't no one say that?
He didn't hire those advisors, Tucker. You know that as well as I do. He's got nobody in his administration who is telling him the truth on these things. And look, let's be clear about this. Even though in the run-up to an election, Biden pretended like high oil prices were a problem, they're not. He's got trillions of subsidies he's got to give away for green energy. That doesn't work if oil prices are low. So this actually works to his benefit in the program he's running. It's not about your price at the pump. It's about his agenda. That's why he can stand in those steps and say it's not going to be that big of a deal. It's not to him. This is helpful to his agenda. It's not helpful to your agenda, but your agenda isn't his, and you got to start there if you want to understand what's going on right now.
Well, really quick, I mean, do you think that Americans are prepared for the radical downward readjustment in their personal standards of living that are going to result from this?
No, I don't think they are. And I think the Biden administration has tried to soft pedal that with things like the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. But the fact is they're on a one-way course. Understand, there's a reason they've got trillions in subsidies out there. It's not because you're going to get to choose how to live your life. You're going to have to get on board, and if you don't, it's going to cost you. Look, this is bigger than people are giving it credit for. Saudi Arabia is calling the shots. America's not, and that's not because of any natural law. It's because of policy choices in this country, your president.
4 words: pay attention to energy.
Yeah.
And people don't. I know that you do. Brian, thanks so much for that analysis. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So remember when the Biden administration told us that the big Chinese spy balloon wasn't really a spy balloon because it wasn't actually collecting sensitive data, because we had somehow shielded our military bases and nuclear sites? Remember when national security reporters repeated that claim? Maybe you don't. Trace Gallagher does, and he joins us tonight with an update. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, going back to early February when the Chinese spy balloon was first spotted over the U.S. until today, the administration has been using the very same phrase to dismiss this concern, saying the balloon had, quoting, limited additive value. That's a fancy way of saying China didn't learn anything new. But now NBC is reporting the spy balloon was not only being controlled by the Chinese, it made multiple passes over several U.S. military sites, including secure nuclear weapon sites like Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. And the balloon was doing figure-8 formations to repeatedly go over certain areas to pick up electronic signals from weapon systems and send it back to China in real time. Back on February 9th, President Biden downplayed the risk. Watch.
Now, look, the total amount of intelligence gathering that's going on by every country around the world is overwhelming. And the idea that a balloon could traverse, break American airspace is, anyway, it's not a major breach.
Except it might be a major breach. Military experts say that by picking up electronic signals on the ground, you can figure out how military leaders communicate with silos and weapon sites. You can glean information on decision-making on the base, including the chain of command, and also get the layout of the base security. Remember, intelligence is all about piecing together puzzles by using various bits of information. Electronic signals and ground communications are vital bits of information. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher for us tonight. What a great explanation. Thank you. So John Fetterman is a senator. He's supposed to be representing Pennsylvania. He's been in the hospital for many weeks now, hospitalized for depression. He's out, apparently, just gave his first interview since leaving. We'll tell you what he said after the break. The more detail you get on John Fetterman, the sadder you feel for John Fetterman. He does seem in some ways like the victim here. That's what the evidence shows. So Fetterman, you'll remember, was elected to the U.S. Senate with the help of lying media organizations who told us he was fine and you didn't like disabled people if you had questions about his condition. But he wasn't fine at all. He was the opposite of fine. He shouldn't have been there. We know that because immediately after taking office, he was hospitalized for depression. In an interview with CBS News yesterday, Fetterman explained that while he was at Walter Reed Medical Center, doctors identified another issue with his health. Watch.
When I talk, what do you hear?
I hear you talking, and I can understand much of what you're saying. But my hearing has a deficiency that makes it difficult for me to fully understand 100% of it.
So he doesn't fully understand everything that he's hearing. Well, that seems like a problem for him personally, also for the country, since he's one of 100 senators. But CBS wasn't worried at all. Instead, they asked the natural question, are you going to run for president? So that seems honestly like a more normal aspiration, taking your boy to a restaurant. But CBS News wants him to run for president. You can't overstate how repulsive a lot of journalists are, most. Dr. Mark Siegel joins us tonight to assess what we saw in this interview. Doctor, what do you think of this?
Tucker, first of all, I can't believe that she asked him if he's running for president. Even before the Depression, the chances of him surviving the term are less than 50% from the kind of stroke he had, and he has a bad heart. Then we find out that he's had chronic depression, which nobody told the voters of Pennsylvania about. He's been suffering it for years. On the positive side, I thought that he was good coming forward and saying I couldn't get out of bed, I didn't want to eat, I was losing weight, I had no happiness in my life, I couldn't celebrate my son's 14th birthday, and I had to be hospitalized because depression is a disease that's so often stigmatized, and over 10% of Americans suffer from severe depression. So in saying that, he makes it less stigmatized. On the other hand, what was he doing in the hospital for 6 weeks? The usual hospitalization is 6 to 10 days. How come, if he's being transparent, we're not finding out what the treatment was there? And you just pointed out there's issues with hearing. That's related to his stroke. You know, there's the issue of that he has a 60% chance or more of recurrent depression, that he goes back in the hospital, all of which leads me to my main point. We feel bad for him. We like that he came forward. We feel compassion for him on a personal level. But what about the voters of Pennsylvania? What about the 14 million people in Pennsylvania? What about the people in the United States who have a Senate that's so divided that every vote matters? And is he up to voting? Is he fit to serve? I have serious concerns about that, and so should every American. Tucker.
That's exactly right. Dr. Mark Siegel, thank you so much.
Thank you.
10% of Wednesday last week, Russian authorities arrested a 31-year-old Wall Street Journal reporter from New Jersey called Evan Gershkovich. At the time, Gershkovich was reporting from an industrial city about 1,000 miles from Moscow. He was doing stories on the Russian war effort. The Russian government claims he was spying. Tonight, Gershkovich sits in pretrial detention. He faces 20 years in prison for espionage. Imagine being his parents. That's awful. And honestly, the Biden administration has not made it better. If you were a high-ranking U.S. official and you sincerely wanted to get Evan Gershkovich home, we hope that every high-ranking U.S. official would want that. If you really wanted it, then you would start by quietly contacting the Russian government through back channels and beginning a negotiation. That is the adult approach. It's the only approach that has even a chance of helping Evan Gershkovich come home. The White House did not do that. It did the opposite. Joe Biden and various cartoon characters who work for him, Kamala Harris, his press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, the totally inept Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, all of them issued self-righteous statements about press freedom, as if they believed in that, and then demanded that the government they're fighting a war against do the right thing. They spent years calling Putin Hitler. Now they expect him to bow to moral pressure from them. Obviously, that's not going to work. And they almost certainly know it's not going to work. But they're doing it anyway. Why? We can only guess. But for the sake of Evan Gershkovich and his family, as well as for our country, we hope the adults arrive very, very soon. So tomorrow, Donald Trump apparently is going to be arraigned in New York City. That's without precedent in American history. No leading presidential candidate, no former president has ever been indicted for any crime. But, of course, the idea of investigating politicians on flimsy legal grounds is not a new thing. And it's been long enough that we can admit, honestly, it seemed to have happened to Bill Clinton. That was gross, an offense against his wife. Was it really a crime? Probably not, certainly not by current standards. But Republicans said it was, and that backfired spectacularly on them. So some have wondered what this is really about. Will the indictment of Trump by Alvin Bragg backfire on the Biden administration and the Democratic Party? Craig Kasheshian is a former Reagan White House pollster and strategist. He's thought a lot about this and seen the numbers. He joins us tonight. Craig, thanks so much for coming on. So it does seem like Donald Trump's poll numbers have risen ever since August, when his home was raided by the FBI and his wife's underwear drawers overturned. And this seems to have accelerated it. Are you certain a connection?
There is indeed. There's a nexus between Americans that are bullied by the government and increase in popularity. We saw that quite clearly, quite succinctly with the Clinton case. Clinton was really on the rocks for a good chunk of that presidency. And then when the Republicans started to gang up on him, it actually worked to his benefit in the end. Likewise, when Joe McCarthy back in the 50s started beating up on other Americans, Democrats started to surge. So we're seeing this as an exemplar of that general theory. Americans don't mind bullies, but they do not like to be bullied. Therein lies the difference. And Trump is now the beneficiary of that. The key thing here is that PR for Trump is like oxygen to a fire. So they may have given him the kiss of life. And we're seeing this in polling numbers conducted by my dear colleagues Robert Cahaly and Matt Towery, where there's been a de facto and de jure surge in Republican respondents who now sympathize with Trump in wake of this indictment. 50% feel more strongly attracted to Trump and sympathetic to him than they did before. And what's even more striking, and I looked at those numbers as one of Reagan's former pollsters, Tucker, they're bona fide. The numbers of respondents are high. It's a legitimate, those are two legitimate polls. Frankly, what stunned me the most about it were Republican women who are rallying around Trump as we speak. So the Democrats better be careful. They may get something if they really want it bad enough, and I fear for them that there could be some sort of backlash in the making here.
If they silence the Republican Party's leading presidential candidate, I think it's not good for the country, I would say. Craig, thank you
not good at all.
for your.
You're welcome, Tucker, and thank you for having me back.
Insight gained over many years. So we don't get into court elections in the state because why would we, except you're seeing a lot of radical judges take the bench, people with history of leniency toward violent criminals and rapists. And it's not good for anybody. It's actually, people die when that happens. Well, there's an election tomorrow in Wisconsin where the choice is very, very clear. And so we're going to tell you what's happening after the break. Well, as Republicans learned the hard way in November of 2020, it's worth paying attention to what's going on in the states, particularly Wisconsin. And with that in mind, you should know about this. A Soros-backed leftist is running against a conservative former justice, Dan Kelly, for a pivotal swing seat on the Supreme Court of Wisconsin. So if Kelly loses this election, which is tomorrow, that means all of Wisconsin's remaining election integrity laws will be tossed out. There's going to be no voter ID, and that's an invitation to fraud. Anyone who's against voter ID is for fraud, period. So this election has massive ramifications. Let's hope it ends the right way. That's it for us tonight. We still don't have the manifesto from the Nashville shooting. Why can't we see it? Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Donald Trump, as you no doubt know, was arraigned in a Manhattan court today. The former president is back in Florida at this hour and scheduled to speak in just a moment from Mar-a-Lago. This feels significant, so we're going to take his remarks live as soon as they begin. But before we get there, it's worth understanding what it is we've just seen. Often the clearest perspectives on our country come from outside its borders. With distance comes clarity. So with that in mind, here is Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele on Twitter today. Quote, "Think what you want about former President Trump and the reasons he's being indicted," Bukele wrote. "But just imagine if this happened in any other country where a government arrested the main opposition candidate. The United States' ability to use, quote, democracy as foreign policy is gone." Thousands thousands of miles from New York City, in the heart of Central America, it is very obvious what just happened at that Manhattan courthouse. It's obvious to many Democrats, too. Trump was criminally charged because he is planning to challenge Joe Biden in the upcoming presidential election. It's really that simple. If Donald Trump had retired in 2020, would he have been arraigned today? Of course not. Top Democrats know that. Some effectively admit it. The liberal blog Politico this morning ran a piece describing what it called President Joe Biden's most senior advisors, predicting that Trump will be the Republican nominee, and because he has now been charged with crimes, he will lose the general election. Thanks to this criminal case, the Biden White House believes that swing voters, the critical voters in a presidential election, are, quote, now permanently out of Trump's reach. And just to make certain that swing voters never fall within Trump's reach, Donald Trump is scheduled to be back in court in New York with the accompanying media circus just weeks before the first Republican primary. This is the boldest election interference ever attempted in this country's history. And if you doubt that, if you think it's maybe on the level, then we suggest you look carefully at the indictment that was unveiled today. Donald Trump, as you probably heard, has been charged with 34 separate crimes. Those crimes turn out on close examination to be the same crime repeated 34 times. And that crime is, quote, falsifying business records in the first degree. So the Manhattan DA alleges that Donald Trump sent his own money to various people for various entirely legal reasons, but didn't account for it correctly in his office records. That's what he's accused of. And even if what Alvin Bragg has said Trump did, he actually did do, Trump could not be charged with that because the statute of limitations has expired. So the question is, how did Alvin Bragg drag Donald Trump into court today? Well, he did it by claiming that Trump falsified business records as a means of violating some other, much more serious law. That's what he's saying. Here's Alvin Bragg today.
Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about. 34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct. The defendant repeatedly made false statements on New York business records. He also caused others to make false statements.
So here's what Bragg just said, in case you weren't paying attention to the lecture. Donald Trump has committed a crime not by changing business records, but by changing business records in order to conceal another more serious crime or to defraud somebody. So let's take it this in order. What is the more serious crime? Well, we have no idea because Bragg hasn't told us. No such more serious crime is listed in the indictment. And critically, and this really is the point, Donald Trump has not been charged with another more serious crime. So what we have as of tonight is an indictment that does not allege specific violations of the law. Well, that's, of course, unconstitutional, but it's also farcical. What about the fraud claim you just heard Bragg make on television? Well, Bragg claims that Trump sent money to Stormy Daniels in order to influence the outcome of the 2016 election, and in so doing, he tried to, quote, defraud voters. Well, that turns out to be an actual crime that's on the books. Bragg is claiming that Donald Trump committed a campaign finance violation, which is a federal crime, by the way. The problem is he did not commit a campaign finance violation. Nobody is claiming that he did, including the Federal Election Commission, which has investigated this question. So as a legal matter, the case brought today, the 34 felonies, make no sense at all. It's ridiculous. But as a political tactic, which is precisely what it is likely to be effective. And that's why the media so fervently supports it. Watch.
A kind of an alliance between different groups that have a history of being dispossessed and discriminated against, whether they are Jews or Black Americans or LGBT folks, that might come together to push back against the white Christian nationalist assault on American democracy.
Well, you don't know what part this man might play in the future of our democracy.
This campaign of disinformation that's continuously undermining our democracy.
One day people will look back and say how we've handled this issue of Trump, how it affects our democracy. Really could be a major event, could be a big turning point, one way or the other.
The federal prosecutors have said this is a crime that imperils our democracy.
So it imperils our democracy, and because we care so deeply about democracy, we're going to prevent the leading candidate in the other party from running for president, not let voters vote for him. Notice there was not one word about any crime here, meaning a violation of statute. So what is this really about? Well, you may have heard MSNBC guest Peter Beinart describe today's circus in Manhattan as part of a larger offensive by a coalition of the aggrieved, and we're quoting, to push back against the white Christian nationalist assault on American democracy. Now, in case you're waiting to hear the real motive here, wait no longer, there it is. Let that sink in. Does that sound like justice to you? Or does that sound like tribal justice? Well, that's, of course, exactly what it is. Now, we're waiting, as we told you at the top, for Donald Trump to speak about all of this from Palm Beach, Florida. But in the meantime, there is a legal process underway, of course. We'd like to get the latest on it. Alina Habba is an attorney who represents Donald Trump, and she joins us tonight. Alina Habba, thank you so much for coming on. So, unless we're misreading this, the actual crime is not listed in the indictment? How can that be?
It's unreal, honestly, Tucker. Let's talk about what we can see in the indictment, which is the years and the dates. And I'm no crazy, brilliant human being, but I'm pretty sure I know how to read a calendar. So we have dates going in February 2017 for a few months there. Where was President Trump in February 2017? In the Oval Office, okay? So what they're saying is there were checks written to his former lawyer while he was in the Oval Office. That's in Washington, D.C. So just on its face, what we do know from this, what he failed to put in was any factual basis, of course, as you pointed out. But what we do know, Tucker, is that he was sitting in the Oval Office. Now, explain to me how that's campaign finance interference, how that affected the election when everyone knew about Stormy in 2016. It makes no sense on its face, which is probably why it's intentionally vague.
Well, sure. I mean, do companies commit federal crimes when they have their employees sign non-disclosure agreements? As every single one of them does every single day? Probably not. Look, if Trump had committed a crime and they were alleging it, I would not defend him. If he was caught bribing someone or hurting someone or stealing money. But this doesn't even approach the appearance of a crime, which is the scariest part. This is just election interference. Am I missing something?
No, you're not missing anything. And by the way, in order to have an effective NDA, you should probably have some consideration, which is called money, right? So for all the non-lawyers, we do this all the time. We do this all the time. And when you have somebody extorting you, which Mark Pomerantz said in his book he believed this to be, and I recommend that you all take a close look at that, he lays this out. We had Michael Cohen, who was a convicted felon and liar, who was afraid of what was going to happen to his wife. We have Mark Pomerantz admitting that they couldn't bring charges. Neither could the FEC, who regulates this. Alvin Bragg stood up today and said he was bringing a state federal crime. That doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's federal crime. It's not a state crime. It's crazy.
And to hear it on NBC News today, MSNBC, with this hush money, really, how many women alleging sexual harassment or assault has NBC News paid off this year? I mean, spare us. Please, I used to work there. Alina Habba, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So authorities all but shut down New York City for Trump's arraignment today. Hundreds of police officers showed up. They closed FDR Drive. Millions of dollars on security because of all the threats and protests. This was the scene outside the courthouse today. Bill Hemmer's one of the few news anchors we trust in this country, and he's our friend. He hosts America's Newsroom on this channel. You were in New York today, Bill. What did you see?
Yeah, Tucker, good evening. Manhattan was largely a mess today. Big parts of the city shut down, as you mentioned.
That prompted this text, followed by a tweet from Eric Trump. He writes this: Alvin Bragg has shut down the entire city, called up 38,000 NYPD officers, closed down the FDR Drive, and is spending an estimated $200 million of city funds for a $130,000 NDA. I never thought I would see this political corruption in our country. Now, we cannot confirm that $200 million number seems high, but for comparison's sake, we know the city spent $500,000 a day for security when Trump was living at Trump Tower before he was sworn in 6 years ago. Now, if we do go to a trial, New York could see a huge bill. Consider since last Thursday, the NYPD was told no days off, everyone works. Even the governor said the National Guard is prepared to keep the peace if needed, and that was not necessary today. So the judge ordered Trump to be back in New York on Monday, the 4th of December, and there's no telling how high the bill will go if the trial goes forward, which brings us to the case itself. In speaking with one of Trump's attorneys tonight, James Trusty tells me they were happily surprised, his words, with the contents of the indictment. He says it's not a terrible thing to have the credibility of Michael Cohen as a star witness. They've got a big problem with the leaks of the indictment before it went public, which is a felony, prison up to 5 years if convicted. Trusty says his team wants to get this case before a judge soon and push for a dismissal. In his words, it could be thrown out in a New York minute. We shall see. Tucker.
What a circus. Bill Hemmer, thanks for that update tonight. Thanks so much. And keep in mind, President Trump will be ordered back to New York in December, right before the Republican primaries, just in case you were hoping to terrify swing voters into voting for an 82-year-old candidate. Well, lots of leaks, as you just heard, have been coming out of this grand jury. That's a felony. The leaks appear to be coming from Alvin Bragg's office. You'd think someone might investigate this, as long as we're bringing people up on 34 bookkeeping-related charges. What exactly are the legal merits of the case against Donald Trump? Well, Alan Dershowitz taught for many years at Harvard, probably the country's most famous legal scholar, author of the book Get Trump. He joins us tonight. Professor, thank you for coming on. So just as a legal matter, as a longtime, lifelong law professor, how would you assess these charges?
You know, part of me was hoping there'd be a smoking gun. It would help the American system. It would help. Agree. But there's nothing here. Here's the theory. Bragg's theory, broken down, is this. When Donald Trump paid $130,000 to make sure that Stormy Daniels didn't embarrass him in front of his wife, his children, his business associates, when he paid the $130,000, he knew he had to immediately list the $130,000 and describe the reason he paid it as hush money to a former porn star in order to stop her from testifying about his adulterous affair. Would anybody in the history of the world ever pay hush money if they knew they had to honestly disclose it? I mean, hush money goes back to Alexander Hamilton. It's one of the oldest phenomenon in American history. I challenge Bragg. He said, he looked the American public in the eye, and he said, I have prosecuted cases like this. It's our bread and butter, including sexual cases. D.A. Bragg named one case where anybody has ever prosecuted somebody for not honestly disclosing the fact that he paid hush money to cover up a sexual matter. It's never happened. It would never have happened if this was not Donald Trump. This is part of Get Trump. And this comes from a liberal Democrat who maintains his right as a constitutional matter to vote against Donald Trump for the third time. But I want to make sure that the American public decides the next election, and not D.A. Bragg, a Democrat, who promised his potential jurors, vote for me, and I will make sure I get Trump. That isn't justice.
And I agree with you on the charges. I mean, if Bragg had alleged a drug-related murder spree or something, you'd be like, okay, you know, we should look at this. But this is an insult, I think, to the system. Alan Dershowitz, appreciate your coming on. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it was, of course, a spectacle today in New York. That was the entire point of it, to terrify voters in a general election from voting for Trump. A judge let a photographer into the courtroom in addition to sketch artists, so media outlets had pictures of Donald Trump in court. They aired these all afternoon. But these same media outlets insisted they were actually very somber, approaching this whole situation with the respect it was due.
My thought is it's a very sad day for America.
If you don't see this as a sad day for America.
It's just so serious and solemn.
There is a sadness, I think, that we got to this point in America.
Well, it is a sad day for America.
It is a serious night and a somber moment for our country.
This should be a somber moment, right? I have a lot of friends on the left side of the spectrum who are doing a happy dance right now, and I don't think that's appropriate.
Yeah, it's just not appropriate. Meek is very sad, as if she had authentic feelings of any kind. Steve Krakauer covers television. He is the author of the book Uncovered. He joins us tonight. I mean, why not? Look, the falseness, I think, comes right through on the tube. Like, there's one thing viewers can perceive immediately. It's whether the person is real. And to say you're really sad about a day you've been praying for at your altar to Baal in your living room or whatever, like, that's not believable, right?
No, they can barely contain the glee that they have, just salivating about and of course, all they wanted was the mugshot. They couldn't even get the mugshot. They let the photographer into the courtroom, which is pretty rare, because they couldn't even get the mugshot that they've been craving for months or years going back. Look, this is all a symptom of the Trump addiction that goes back really 8 years. They've been craving this moment. They have this very deep, sick love-hate relationship with Donald Trump, and this is all playing out now. I think the biggest tell is you look in New York, the streets of New York, when there's more media reporters and photographers than protesters, you know it's all a sham and all a show and all a circus, and they can't even pretend. No one believes that they actually think that this is some serious thing. As you lay out in the open, Tucker, if they actually explain to the audience what this is, then the audience would understand that the entire coverage, the whole thing that they've built, is all a house of cards. So they have to pretend that it's about democracy and racism when we actually really know what it's all about, which is their deep love and hate for Donald Trump.
But at a certain point, I mean, they accused him of betraying his country and committing treason, a death penalty offense, and all that. And it's really come down to his accountant put the wrong heading on a column. I mean, that's really what it is now?
Well, the media, yeah, they can't say that, but they also know, I think it's very clear that they know this is not going to get Donald Trump in jail or even dropping out of the GOP race, and they don't want that. Of course, they want him running. As you mentioned, the Politico story, this is exactly what they want. They want him kind of beat up a little bit, but then actually the GOP nominee, and if he was really this threat to America, as they proclaim that he is, why would you want this person being the one of two people to be the next president? And this is only going to help him, as it did in 2016. They've learned nothing from what they did only 7 years ago.
Well, and if you believed in democracy, you would let voters make that choice, because that's what a democracy is, a system in which the voters choose, not the TV pundits and George Soros. Steve Krakauer, great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So, as we told you at the top, Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, has charged the Republican frontrunner with an indictment that does not even specify a crime. So whether you hate Trump, it doesn't really matter how you feel about Trump. If you care about the system that we've lived under for these hundreds of years and we're justly proud of, maybe you should say something about this. Has anybody who didn't vote for Trump, other than Dershowitz, who you just saw, said a word about it? Well, Tulsi Gabbard ran for president as a Democrat, served in the Congress, of course, from Hawaii. She joins us tonight. Congresswoman, thank you so much for coming on. So, I mean, at what point does it become not about one guy, one candidate, and about the preservation of a justice system that all of us want to live under?
The point that needs to happen is right now. This is a really sad day for our country. And the bottom line is we have a Democrat establishment that is so blinded by their hatred of Donald Trump and their love for power that they don't care about the country. They don't care about how their weaponization of our law enforcement against their political opponent is undermining the very foundation of our democracy, our rule of law. They don't care about the serious precedent that this is setting that fundamentally undermines that foundation, potentially for a very long time to come. Now, I know some Democrats who in their heart know that what's happening is wrong. I know there's probably a lot of Democrats and independents who are watching your show right now who feel the same way, but they're so afraid to speak up. They're so afraid to be targeted, called traitors, cast out. But the important thing for us all, those of us who love this country and value democracy and understand the importance of preserving the rule of law in this country, now is the time for courage to take a stand, to defend that which we hold dear, to defend this country and to defend our democracy, and have the courage to stand up not only for us today, but recognize that there are long-lasting consequences. If we do nothing, it'll be lost.
Yeah. Well, if you and Donald Trump had just signed on to the neocon foreign policy, you'd both still be in office, I think. Tulsi Gabbard, appreciate your perspective as always.
Thank you, Tucker.
So as you can see, the Republican frontrunner is filing in. You just saw his son Eric a second ago. We're going to go to Charlie Hurd of the Washington Times really quick for an overview of what's going on today. Charlie, thanks for coming on. What are your thoughts as we await the former president?
Well, I got to tell you, Tucker, it's kind of interesting. You know, obviously it is a sad day, you know, to see that spectacle, the circus in Manhattan, where every single institution has failed. You have a rogue runaway prosecutor who is putting politics before the law. The only person involved in any of this who has respected the law and respected the country is Donald Trump. He didn't have to go to New York today. In fact, he got a clear pass from the governor of Florida that the governor of Florida wouldn't allow him to be arrested and hauled to New York. He went because he has respect for the system. And then what is the thanks he gets for that? He goes in there and the judge tells him, doesn't put a gag order on him in the middle of an election, but tells him, you watch what you say. I'm watching you. This is, you know, this is the fire alarm that voters pulled in 2016. This is our country that is broken, and this is what Donald Trump has campaigned on his entire political existence.
God bless you all. God bless you all. And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. Never thought it could happen. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it. From the beginning, the Democrats spied on my campaign. Remember that? They attacked me with an onslaught of fraudulent investigations. Russia, Russia, Russia. Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. Impeachment hoax number 1. Impeachment hoax number 2, the illegal and unconstitutional raid on Mar-a-Lago, right here. The lying to the FISA courts, the FBI and DOJ relentlessly pursuing Republicans, the unconstitutional changes to election laws by not getting approvals from state legislators, the millions of votes illegally stuffed into ballot boxes and all caught on government cameras. And just recently, the FBI and DOJ in collusion with Twitter and Facebook in order not to say anything bad about the Hunter Biden laptop from hell, which exposes the Biden family as criminals and which, according to the pollsters, would have made a 17-point difference in the election result. And we needed a lot less than that, like about 16.9. It would have been in our favor, not my favor, our favor, because our country is going to hell. And we remember the 51 intelligence agents who said Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. It didn't exist. It was Russian disinformation. Remember that? And that was all confirmed strongly by the FBI when they all knew that it wasn't Russian disinformation. And so much more. Our elections were like those of a third world country. And now this massive election interference at a scale never seen before in our country, beginning with the radical left, George Soros-backed prosecutor Alvin Bragg of New York, who campaigned on the fact that he would get President Trump. I'm going to get him. I'm going to get him. This is a guy campaigning. He wanted to get President Trump at any cost, and this before he knew anything about me, didn't know a thing about me. He was campaigning. As it turns out, virtually everybody that has looked at this case, including rhinos and even hardcore Democrats, say there is no crime and that it should never have been brought. Never have been brought. Everybody. Even people that aren't big fans have said it. They said this is not the right thing to do. It's an insult to our country, as the world is already laughing at us for so many other reasons, like our open borders, our incompetent withdrawal from Afghanistan, where we left behind American citizens, $85 billion worth of the best military equipment in the world, lost 13 magnificent young lives, and far too many to mention that are so badly hurt with the loss of arms and legs and facial obliteration. The most embarrassing time in our country's history, in my opinion. Then our give up on energy independence and even energy dominance. We're going to be dominant within 6 months, more than any other nation times 2. We had this all just 3 years ago. Our raging crime statistics, if you look in Democrat-run cities, numbers the likes of which we have never seen before, the open threats by various countries of the use of nuclear weapons, something never mentioned or discussed by outside nations during the Trump administration, and which could very well lead under the Biden administration's leadership to an all-out nuclear World War III can happen. We're not very far away from it, believe it or not. An economy that has been crippled by the biggest inflation we have seen in more than 60 years, and a military that I used to defeat ISIS in 4 weeks. They said it would take 4 years. 4 weeks to kill al-Baghdadi and Soleimani, that has now gone woke at the top levels by trying to indoctrinate everyone down to the lowest ranking patriot. But now they have really stepped up their efforts by indicting the 45th President of the United States, who received $75 million votes, which is more than any sitting president in the history of our country. And in the wings, they've got a local racist Democrat district attorney in Atlanta who is doing everything in her power to indict me over an absolutely perfect phone call, even more perfect than the one I made with the president of Ukraine. Remember, I kept saying, that's a perfect call. This one was more perfect. Nobody said, sir, you shouldn't say that. Many people on the phone were hung up in disgust because of something I inappropriately said, because nothing was said wrong. In fact, at the end of the call, we agreed to continue our conversation about election fraud, and election fraud specifically in Georgia, at a later time. Many people on the phone, including lots of lawyers, nobody found anything wrong with that perfect call until a book promotion tour many months later. All of a sudden they say, you know, I remember Trump making a call. Let's look at that. This fake case was brought only to interfere with the upcoming 2024 election, and it should be dropped immediately. Immediately. Then you have a radical left lunatic known as a bomb thrower who is harassing hundreds of my people day after day over the boxes hoax. You know, the boxes hoax, as we call it. Just so everyone knows, I come under what's known as the Presidential Records Act, which was designed and approved by Congress long ago just for this reason. Under the Act, I'm supposed to negotiate with NARA, the National Archives and Records Administration, which as of this date is a radical left troublemaking organization that red flags the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights as dangerous and triggering. Can you imagine? This is what we have to deal with. But there is no criminality under the Presidential Records Act. That is not what it's all about. We were negotiating in very good faith, proper way, in order to return some or all of the documents that I openly and in very plain sight brought with me to Mar-a-Lago from our beautiful White House, just as virtually every other president has done in the past. When FBI and DOJ officials with NARA were here, I told my lawyer to show them the very secure storage room in which they were locked. The FBI's sole request in writing was, could you please put another lock on the door? We immediately complied. It's a lot different than the Biden situation, isn't it? The next thing I know, we were raided by many gun-toting FBI agents who took whatever they wanted, including my passports and medical records. Everybody was in shock. Nobody had ever heard of such a raid before. We can't even believe it. Who would think that that could happen today? I immediately thought of the Fourth Amendment that protects against unreasonable search and seizure. But they did it anyway because our justice system has become lawless. They're using it now, in addition to everything else, to win elections. Apparently, they're not looking at me through the view of the Non-Criminal Presidential Records Act. They came up with a new one. This is a new one. And they're looking at me through the Espionage Act. Think of that. How does that sound? Of 1917, where the penalty is death. Even though that has absolutely nothing to do with openly taking boxes of documents and mostly clothing and other things to my home, which President Obama has done, the Bushes have done, Jimmy Carter has done, Ronald Reagan has done. Everybody's done. In fact, Hillary Clinton got rid of 33,000 emails, and that was okay. But nobody's done it like Joe Biden. This lunatic special prosecutor named Jack Smith, I wonder what it was prior to a change, who others of his ilk say he's even worse than they are, is only looking at Trump, yet Joe Biden took massive amounts more documents, even removed many boxes to Chinatown. You believe that? Just got $10 million from China. Where did that come from? I guess they were banking on Hunter's expertise and had others stored in unsecured offices in Pennsylvania and strewn all over his garage floor where his now very famous Corvette is also stored. All over the floor, including classified documents. But that's okay. Perhaps most importantly, he has 1,850 boxes in Delaware, which he is refusing to give up. But isn't that real obstruction? That's obstruction. As president, I have the right to declassify documents, and the process is automatic. If I take them with me, it's automatic, declassify. Biden was vice president. He had absolutely no right to declassify as vice president. He doesn't come under the Non-Criminal Presidential Records Act. He comes under the very criminal Federal Records Act, unfortunately for him, but it's not going to matter because they don't follow the law, which has very severe penalties. He had classified documents that he took while he was a senator, which is absolutely inexcusable. And other senators, including Democrats, are outraged. But he's not being harassed and hounded like the people who work for me are. In fact, they seem to have forgotten about his documents entirely. So many, thousands and thousands, it's okay with him. They like to say that I'm obstructing, which I'm not, because I was working with NARA very nicely until the raid on my home. But Biden is obstructing by making it impossible to get the 1,850 boxes or explain why many documents were located in Chinatown. Can't explain it. Why were they in Chinatown? I don't know. Lastly, I'm under investigation. This time a civil investigation by another racist in reverse who also campaigned on, I will get Trump. I will get him. This was her campaign. Never ran for office. I will get him. Her name is Letitia James. And she proclaimed while campaigning, quote, I look forward to going into the office of the Attorney General every single day suing him and then going home. Just before she knew me. She announced, what is fueling my soul right now is Trump. And that she had her eyes on Trump Tower. Those eyes are focused on Trump Tower. Didn't know the young lady. She even assured her supporters in an election promise that we're going to definitely sue him. We're going to be a real pain in the ass. He's going to know my name personally. And then she claimed that I was an illegitimate president. Think of that. With all we did. With all we did on energy, with all we did on the military, on taxes, biggest tax cuts in history, biggest regulation cuts in history, right to try, people able to get drugs now that aren't approved. Hopefully you don't have that problem. Letitia James vowed to use every area of the law to, quote, investigate President Trump and his business transactions. Those transactions are going to be investigated, she said. And that of her family and his family. Because we're going after his family, and we're going after them hard. This is all before entering office and all before knowing anything at all about me. But she was going to get me. This is why, along with unrelenting crime, so many people and companies are leaving New York. She said that I falsified my financial statements, but in fact we're proving and will prove that my financial statements were substantially more than we submitted, not less. And in all cases have a strong disclaimer clause in them which tells the institutions that may look at that if they want to, not to rely on the statement. But they've got a problem with their case because, number one, I'm very underleveraged. They can't believe it, all the stuff they read and gave, and have very little debt relative to the value of assets. And importantly, not one bank has lost even $1. She was investigating me to save banks. They have very good lawyers. But they didn't lose $1 with us during this period of time. In fact, the banks we're talking about made almost $200 million off Donald Trump, and they liked me very much. We never missed a payment, never got a default notice, had a great relationship with all of them. I don't need banks. We have a lot of cash. I built a great business with my family, built a fantastic business. I have a son here who's done a great job, and I have another son here who's done a great job. Tiffany. And Ivanka. And Barron will be great someday. He's tall. He is tall, and he's smart. But I have a great family, and they've done a fantastic job, and we appreciate it very much. They've gone through hell. So she's suing me over banks that weren't defrauded when she should be focused on violent crime that's driving people out of the state. This is a persecution, not an investigation. She's put our family through hell. It's cost hundreds of millions of dollars to defend, but our heads are held very, very high. They want to settle the case, but I want no part of that. So here we are now. It's where we were today, in a city that was so great just 4 or 5 years ago. But now we're there, spent time there today, as you possibly read, with a local failed district attorney charging a former president of the United States for the first time in history on a basis that every single pundit and legal analyst said, there is no case. There's no case. They kept saying, there's no case. Virtually everyone But it's far worse than that, because he knew there was no case. That's why last week he delayed for a month and then immediately took that back and threw this ridiculous indictment together. Came out today, everybody said, this is not really an indictment, there's nothing here. My lawyers came to me and they said, there's nothing here, they're not even saying what you did. The criminal is the district attorney because he illegally leaked massive amounts of grand jury information, for which he should be prosecuted, or at a minimum, he should resign. And Alvin Bragg's wife confirmed a report that claimed her husband has Trump nailed on felonies. She has since locked down her Twitter account. His chief prosecutor, who represented the Democrats and crooked Hillary Clinton in a firm run by Chuck Schumer's brother, Robert, he quit the firm in order to go to work in the DA office in order to get Trump. Can you imagine that? Hillary Clinton's lawyer, Democrat firm. Ultimately, he quit as chief prosecutor because Bragg didn't think he had a case. Think of that same guy that brought this ridiculous thing today. Yet during his investigation, this prosecutor named Mark Pomerantz wrote and published a book saying all sorts of privileged things and has been very strongly reprimanded. He was reprimanded so strongly. I've never seen anything like it. That's probably the end of it. But what he did was probably very illegal, but he was very, very strongly reprimanded. Even District Attorney Bragg was furious with him. They were having a tremendous fight in the office because of it. But hope is never lost because various prosecutors in the DA's office also quit because they thought President Trump was being treated very unfairly. How about that? Isn't that great? Oh, I love them. I'd like to meet them. I'd like to meet them. The DA's office even had a web page. Meet the team of executives who have done this to President Trump. That was the title. Isn't that nice? They immediately had to take it down. Meanwhile, overall crime in New York was up 30% last year. Much more than that the year before, with felony assaults, robberies, and burglaries all up by massive, massive numbers. Not the same place that I know, not the same place that you know. And this is where we are right now. I have a Trump-hating judge with a Trump-hating wife and family whose daughter worked for Kamala Harris and now receives money from the Biden-Harris campaign, and a lot of it. We recently had another trial, and the same judge told the fine man who worked for me for many, many years that if you admit your guilt, you will be in jail for 90 days. But if you don't, if we go through a trial and you're found guilty, you're going away for 10 years and maybe longer, which for a 75-year-old man with a great family really means life. What the prosecutors and judge did to that man, I will never forget, because it's right out of the old Soviet Union. That's where we are. They said, you say anything about Trump, meaning that's bad, and you won't even have to serve the 90 days. You'll walk free. And they say that to many of my employees. We have this Jack Smith lunatic threatening people every single day through his representatives. They're threatening jail terms. But talk about Trump and you'll go free. This is where we are as a nation. Who would have thought they can't beat us at the ballot box, so they try and beat us through the law. That's the country in which we live, however, right now. The USA is a mess. Our economy is crashing. Inflation is out of control. Russia has joined with China. Can you believe that? Saudi Arabia has joined with Iran. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have formed together as a menacing and destructive coalition. Would have never happened if I were your president. Would never have happened. Nor would Russia attacking Ukraine have happened. All of those lives would be saved. All of those beautiful cities would be standing. Our currency is crashing and will soon no longer be the world standard, which will be our greatest defeat, frankly, in 200 years. There will be no defeat like that. That will take us away from being even a great power. If you took the 5 worst presidents in the history of the United States and added them up, they would not have done near the destruction to our country as Joe Biden and the Biden administration have done. Incredibly, we are now a failing nation. We are a nation in decline. And now these radical left lunatics want to interfere with our elections by using law enforcement. We can't let that happen. With all of this being said, and with a very dark cloud over our beloved country, I have no doubt, nevertheless, that we will make America great again. Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Donald Trump, former president, now the front runner for the Republican nomination in 2024, from his home and club in Palm Beach, Florida, Mar-a-Lago, on the day he became the first ever former American president to be indicted, now arraigned. Charges that seem not only weak, but in fact vaporous, that may not actually exist. But Trump seeming pretty much unrattled. And in fact, if you haven't checked in with him in his public appearances over the last 2 years, you may have noticed he seemed a lot looser, really, than he did when last we saw him in January of 2021, in case you haven't been following it. So, but clearly this sets the stage for a lot of political intensity. Trump didn't beat around the bush at all. He called the independent counsel looking into the document case appointed by the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, an open partisan. He called that independent counsel a lunatic about 5 times, and alluded to the legal threats people around him have been getting, which is pretty common in these things. Almost nobody ever talks about it, but Trump just did, as you heard. So we spoke for about maybe 25 minutes. Will Cain is co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend. He was watching carefully and joins us with what he believes the big takeaways were. Will Cain, thanks a lot for coming on. So what'd you take from that?
I appreciate you asking me, Tucker, what the big takeaway was, because I think Donald Trump came out loose, aggressive, and clear-eyed about the big takeaway. He quickly broadened the scope beyond the prosecution there in New York, Tucker. He said, that's right, and the system has responded to Donald Trump like a foreign substance, a foreign body. And he is to the system. It's flooded with antibodies to destroy Trump. And he quickly pivoted to talking about that broader effort, the witch hunt, to destroy Trump. And if you think about it, Tucker, the DOJ, the FBI, state AGs, local prosecutors, the media, the military-industrial complex, much of his own political party, have all put forth a very well-funded, at this point, 8 to 9 year investigation and effort to destroy Trump. And what have they come up with at the end of the day, Tucker? A misdemeanor bookkeeping charge. That's it. You know, people say in New York, they say in New York, you know, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. A lot of people don't know there's a second stanza to that saying. But you better have impeccable bookkeeping once you make it. You know, we can't promise you're going to get to work without being stabbed. But if you do make it without being shoved in front of the subway, once you get there, you better have perfect record keeping. We're going to be on that like white on rice. And that is what they've been able to come up with so far in this witch hunt, which has spanned almost a decade. Every institution of the federal government, most of the private sector as well, in terms of corporate media and corporate America. And what they've managed to conjure up so far is misdemeanor bookkeeping, Tucker.
I agree with that assessment. I feel guilty ever watching a politician speak and then agreeing with it because it makes me feel like a shill, like everybody else on television. But in this case, Trump is absolutely right. This has nothing to do with his purported crimes, which are fake. It has to do with his views, which are terrifying to the people who run our government in a very undemocratic way, I would say. And he's absolutely right, and so are you.
And you
appreciate you coming on. Yeah. Sorry, Will, can we finish that?
Thank you, Tucker.
Okay.
I was going to say, you have to. I appreciate your unwillingness and your reticence to ever echo a politician's words, and I share that sentiment, Tucker. But we have to, and I know you do, look beyond this, beyond the lens of orange man bad, and we have to care about law and due process. And anyone that does can quickly see that what we have here is the abuse of a political system to manipulate an election. And if you doubt that, if you doubted it just beyond seeing the weakness of the case, I give you that the prosecution asked for their trial date to be January 2024, right when primaries start.
Exactly right.
This is a political persecution.
It's not about the politicians. They're old, but some of us have kids, you know, and they're going to have to live here in a system that we want to function. Will King, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tucker.
Harmeet Dillon is obviously a famous civil rights attorney. She's highly familiar with this case, and we have to ask, why did a judge allow cameras into the court to take pictures of Trump? Normally you see sketches. That seemed like part of a strategy, a political strategy, not a legal one. Harmeet Dillon, thank you for coming on. What did you make of that?
Well, I agree with you, Tucker. I mean, if the Democratic Party is using this prosecution, which I believe they are, to influence the outcome of the next election, this photograph is going to be a prop in those campaign ads. And it all seems to be, you know, really well targeted towards that. I would even say that the judge not putting a gag order on both sides in this case is the same, because by scolding the defendant and saying you better stay away from an imaginary line that I'm not going to draw for you, he's effectively chilling his speech while at the same time not putting any constraints whatsoever on the district attorney, who could go out and in fact completely ignore his oath to do justice and prejudge that the defendant is already guilty. He said that multiple times in his remarks while winking and at the same time admitting that he didn't even have to articulate what the charges are. So this entire proceeding seems to be clearly rigged in a political manner. And somewhere along the way, Tucker, Americans may have not noticed that the Democratic Party has basically turned into a gang of thugs. There is no concept of due process. There is no concept of even, with a straight face, attempting to tie the charges to something that you can prove in front of a court of law that could stand up on appeal. And so if there were ever any more evidence than we already suspected, I think the way that today's proceedings went really underscores the political nature of this. And if I were to make a comment about the president's remarks today, I would say that what was missing from that is pointing out that this indictment is really aimed at the American people. It's aimed at President Trump supporters. It's aimed at terrorizing people away from supporting a particular candidate. And it is meant to remind all of us that if they can do this to a former president, they can concoct false charges without even articulating what the charges are against any American for political reasons. And that is a form of emotional terrorism, Tucker. It should really be terrifying to all Americans that this is the current state of the law in New York City.
He should say that in every public appearance going forward. I agree with that. Harmeet Dillon, thank you so much. So we want to end tonight on the most elevated and wisest possible note. And of course, you already know who's coming next. Victor Davis Hanson, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, joins us for the 2 minutes and 10 seconds we have left. Professor, welcome.
Thank you. Well, Tucker, I think that we're seeing war clouds gather abroad, and I think the United States economy, politically, foreign policy is at a nadir, and we've lost now all credibility that we've stored up over 233. We have no more moral credibility to lecture people about the democratic process. And your guests have spelled it out pretty well. They have an agenda, the left, that does not appeal to 51% of the people. So they attack the process and they attack the candidate. And what we're seeing is not the end of it. This tonight was the very beginning. This is going to go on through 3 prosecutors for a year and a half with the intent of getting just enough empathy for Donald Trump that he will be nominated prosecuted and then seeing him gag ordered, hemorrhaged, and maybe even incarcerated to nullify his viability in the general election. So it's the worst example of third world election tampering. And they don't have a message, and so whether it's symbolically tearing up the State of the Union or denying the Speaker, the Minority Leader in the House appointments, or trying to threaten the filibuster to be ended, or the Electoral College, or pack the court, it's all processed because they don't have a message and they're desperate. They're revolutionaries. We're in the middle of a revolution that we don't even know that we're in. I think Donald Trump said as much as he could, but I imagine that in the next week we'll see a gag order leveled against him, and then the other prosecutors will be encouraged, and this is going to go on, this psychodrama is going to go on for a year and a half.
Which is entirely the point. Very quickly, is there not a single Democrat in Washington who cares about the country enough to say what you just said?
I don't think so. I think some people like Joe Manchin have spoken out, but there's no Democratic Party anymore. It doesn't exist. It's not even a progressive party. It's a woke, hardcore, leftist, revolutionary movement. It has no popular support, but throughout history, such movements didn't really need. They didn't need it. They got power anyway.
Victor Davis Hanson, thank you so much. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. There's much fallout this evening, and there will be for months, stemming from the arraignment of the Republican frontrunner in Manhattan yesterday. And we're going to cover that in some detail. But we want to start tonight with a trend that we have noticed that might be worth knowing about, and it has to do with the dollar. For nearly 80 years since the end of the Second World War, the U.S. dollar has effectively been the currency of the world. For our entire lifetimes, there was virtually no place on the entire globe you could go that would turn down a 20. Andrew Jackson's face beside the famous seal of the U.S. Treasury was probably America's best-known export. From Dar es Salaam to Sri Lanka to the smallest gold mining outpost in the Amazon basin, every shopkeeper on earth recognized a $20 bill. The dollar was universal, and not just universal in commerce, though the majority of international transactions were conducted in dollars, but universally held as a long-term store of value globally. The world's central banks stockpiled U.S. dollars, far more than any other currency. Now, most Americans may not have known that, or they did, but it doesn't matter whether they knew it. It was very good for everyone who lives here. Because there were so many U.S. dollars in circulation outside of the country, the cost of borrowing money inside the country remained artificially low. And that's one of the reasons that in this country, America, middle-class people could buy their own homes. The U.S. government, meanwhile, was able to run up astronomical debts without many obvious consequences. Now, from time to time, the Congress would debate something called the debt ceiling, but it was abstract. For most people, the entire topic didn't seem very relevant to their lives because, for most of that time, it really wasn't. America printed the U.S. dollar, we controlled the global reserve currency, and that meant that for us, money was cheap. We had privileges that nobody else in the world had. It's been very nice, but what would happen if it ended? You don't even really want to think about that because the consequences would be too ugly, really ugly. But we started to worry about it about a year ago, really the day the Russian military rolled over the Ukrainian border. Now, by itself, that was a destabilizing event. War always is destabilizing and always challenges the existing order. But it was the West's reaction to the Russian invasion that seemed ominous. Policymakers in the U.S. went insane. Joe Biden, helped by his Republican allies in the Senate, appeared to be determined not simply to topple the Russian government in some kind of regime change war, but to blow up the post-war economic order that had served the U.S. so generously for so long. So we thought at the time that the real threat to our future wasn't just the billions we were sending to Zelensky. That was reckless, but probably not going to end America. The real threat was the unprecedented economic sanctions that Joe Biden was allowed to, in fact, encouraged to impose. Those sanctions, you'll recall, were supposed to hurt Russia. But even in March of last year, it seemed obvious they were going to hurt the United States much more than they hurt Russia. Here's what we said 13 months ago. We should prepare to lose our position as holder of the world's reserve currency. That is happening in slow motion. It's unmistakable. Now, the Biden people seem to have no idea this is going on, or maybe they want it to happen. Joe Biden was up there at the State of the Union bragging about how he took 30 points off the Russian ruble in a single day. Hooray, good for us! But once we stop celebrating our win, the destruction of the Russian economy, they deserve it. You got to wonder, is there a downside to this? Could it be a Pyrrhic victory? Let's see. These policies have driven Russia, China, India, Turkey, and other countries to accelerate their flight from the U.S. dollar. Now, to be clear, that's the majority of the global economy. This may be the most reckless and destructive thing any American president has ever done to the United States. So that was last year, and at the time it was really just yelling into the wind. Those views were considered absurd, even treasonous. Biden and his Republican allies described sanctions against Russia as morally essential. So we seized oligarchs' yachts at anchor. We closed the Apple store in Moscow. We were all assured these were important victories, and anyone who asked questions about their long-term economic consequences was a Putin stooge. That was the consensus in Washington last spring, in case you've forgotten what it sounded like.
The purpose of the sanctions has always been and continues to be deterrence. But let's also recognize the unique nature of the sanctions that we have outlined. These are some of the greatest sanctions, if not the strongest, that we've ever issued.
The president believes that sanctions are intended to deter.
As to the sanctions, the most important thing we can do is to use them as a deterrent, as a means of dissuading Russia from engaging in further aggression.
We are right now enforcing powerful economic sanctions. We're cutting off Russia's largest banks from the international financial system, preventing Russia's central bank from defending the Russian ruble, making Putin's $630 billion war fund worthless.
These people are such buffoons, and all the Republican senators nodding in agreement. You watch that and you wonder if they really believe what they were telling you. If they really did believe that, they're stupider than they look. These sanctions were never going to work in the way they promised because, unlike the United States, Russia does not have a late-stage finance economy. Russian oligarchs do not get rich from credit default swaps. They get rich from selling actual things that people need in order to live. Oil, natural gas, iron, fertilizer, coal, wheat. By some measures, Russia has the largest resource economy in the world. Oh, okay. So they could barter if they needed to. So a year later, despite the sanctions you were told are the greatest ever devised, the Russian ruble is just as strong against the U.S. dollar as it was before the war in Ukraine. So we didn't really hurt Russia with those sanctions, certainly not long term. Who'd we hurt? Ourselves. E.J. Antoni and Peter St. Onge wrote an incisive piece in the Daily Caller last week that explains part of why this happened. Quote, a critical feature of a reserve currency is its apolitical nature, which Biden is now gutting. After both parties in Washington destroyed the dollar's stability with inflation, now the Biden administration has chosen to wield the dollar as a weapon. Together, these two factors send a message to foreigners, which is they should get out while they still can. In response to Russia's war with the Ukraine, the U.S. froze the dollar reserves of Russia's central bank. To be clear, these were not American assets. These were dollars owned by the Russian central bank and the Russian people. The seizure was intended to cause bank runs and collapse Russia's credit system. It didn't work. Instead, it exposed the Biden administration's willingness to violate the trillions of dollars that foreigners rightfully own. The danger of this precedent is difficult to overstate, end quote. Now, all of us saw that happening, but you couldn't say anything because Russia, bad. We can't even watch their hockey teams. All right. But what do you think happened next as we were jumping up and down and talking about Winston Churchill? Well, smart foreigners, and there are some, believe it or not, started to dump the U.S. dollar. Why? Because the U.S. dollar was no longer a reliable store of value. Suddenly, it was a political weapon that could be wielded at will against anyone who held it. So what if you had a border dispute with one of your neighbors that the State Department hadn't authorized? Or what if you accidentally criticized transgender theology and irritated the Human Rights Campaign? Well, the U.S. government might denounce you as immoral and then confiscate all your money. Because they just did that with Russia. And as a result, dollars began to look much less appealing to the rest of the world. And so de-dollarization began. And it has accelerated at remarkable speed, almost without comment in the American media, over the last year. So Russia announced it will conduct business in Asia, Africa, and Latin America in Chinese currency. Brazil, which has a brand new government supported by the Biden administration, announced it will do the same thing. Brazil, largest economy in the hemisphere after ours. Pakistan is doing the same thing. That's a longtime U.S. ally. India and Malaysia, two of the biggest economies in the world, announced they'll be settling their trade in their own currencies, not the dollar. Even France, which we liberated, is using Chinese currency in a new liquefied natural gas trade. China and Saudi Arabia are now major business partners. And again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is happening around the world, and all of it is shutting out the U.S. dollar. And it's happening a lot faster than anybody could have predicted. And yet no one in Washington seems aware that it is happening. So if you wanted the rest of the world to trust your currency, the last thing you would do is use it as a weapon or print too much of it. Printing too much of your currency causes inflation, and that saps the value of the currency. No one wants to hold a currency that is worth less consistently every year. That's sixth grade economics, but Joe Biden can't be bothered with that. So he's printing more money. Here he is last week announcing another $10 billion check. Not for you or East Palestine or anyone in our country who needs it, but for foreign governments.
Working in close cooperation with the United States Congress, we plan to add another $690 million for new funding for the presidential initiative over the next 2 years. And over the course of 3 years, my administration intends to work with Congress to commit $9.5 billion across all our efforts to advance democracy around the world. We're all safer when that occurs.
We've been asking for months for any Republican senator who supports this, whether it's Tom Tillis or John Cornyn of Texas, to come on the show and calmly explain why you support this. None of them have accepted our invitation. But at this point, you begin to wonder, what does the United States have that will retain its value over time? We should do an inventory of our assets. So Biden, as you just saw, is continuing to send the contents of our treasury, our dollars, to corrupt oligarchs in Eastern Europe and around the world. And yet at the very same time, and you should pay attention to this, he's selling off America's most valuable hard asset. That's our strategic petroleum reserve. Because unlike the U.S. dollar, oil, which is in the reserve, has inherent value. Oil is the densest store of transportable energy known to man. So unlike fiat currencies like the dollar, oil will always have value. That's why Russia is not now impoverished, because they have a lot of oil. But we have less, because the SPR has been drained. In the last fiscal year, the Biden administration sold off 218 million barrels of oil, including bewilderingly, criminally, to the government of China. How much oil is that? It's more oil sold from the SPR in 1 year than in all previous years combined. So what happens when we empty it? Well, there's not much left. Oh, what about our gold? America's gold reserves have not been fully audited in generations. So they can say whatever they want, but the truth is we don't really know how much gold is in Fort Knox. So the SPR becomes even more vital, and now it's disappearing. And as it does, the power of the United States ebbs. At some point, what's going to be left? They'll be draining the Great Lakes and shipping the water to the Gobi Desert for cotton farming. They'll be selling the curtains. So how do you fix this? Well, ending the war in Ukraine immediately would help, which we could do, because we're in charge of NATO, but we're not even trying. In fact, we're pushing even harder for a direct conflict with nuclear-armed Russia. And politicians in Washington remain mired in their weird boomer World War II fantasies where they're all Winston Churchill and Zelensky's the head of the French resistance. We could give a million examples, but we can't resist, once again, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, last month.
I'm going to try to help explain to the American people that defeating the Russians in Ukraine is the single most important event going on in the world right now.
Defeating the Russians in Ukraine is not the single most important event in the world from the perspective of the United States. It's not even number 15 on the list. It's way below ending the importation of fentanyl into this country, and it's way, way below preserving the strength of the U.S. dollar. But if Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden and the rest of these reckless leaders have their way, an increasing number of countries will do what so many have already done, which is begin to reject the U.S. dollar. And what will happen then? Well, all those dollars will come home, and the value of our currency will plummet even further. And that will lead to poverty across the United States, and that will lead to the typical political and cultural volatility that inevitably follows economic collapse. Disaster. And we've seen it before. Of course, you know the famous pictures from Germany in the early 20s. Banknotes and wheelbarrows. When I buy a cup of coffee, that'll be 30 pounds of currency. Kids playing with worthless stacks of Deutschmarks. That was called Weimar, the Weimar Republic. And that government collapsed because of hyperinflation. And then economic collapse led to communist revolutions across Germany and ultimately to, fill in the blank, the Nazi regime. That's well known. In fact, it's a cliche at this point. But here's the thing that nobody seems to remember. What brought on the economic collapse that set the world on fire? Does anyone remember that? Why did the German government blow up its own currency? Well, simple. The German government took on too much debt in order to pay for a pointless war. Yes, a pointless war did that. And if that sounds familiar, it's because exactly what we have done repeatedly for decades. We did it in Vietnam. We did it in Iraq. We did it in Afghanistan. And every time we got away with it because uniquely we held the world's reserve currency. But this time could be very, very different. The war against Russia will be the last war we can afford to fight. Luke Groman is an economist. He joins us now. Luke, thanks so much for coming on. This seems to be happening kind of right in front of us for those who are paying attention, but I don't hear anybody talking about it, and I wonder why.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of talking about it outside of the niche Wall Street community. There's some chatter about it there, but there's not been a lot of talk about ultimately what I think was one of the biggest moments in finance and in the global economy since Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, which was what you mentioned before, which was the U.S. freezing Russian FX reserves last spring.
So basically that was saying those are U.S. dollars, we printed those dollars, and even though there's been no court case and the people who own those dollars have not been implicated in a crime, we're taking them.
In essence, I think it is important to separate the dollar, which is the medium of exchange, from and the global reserve currency, and I think it'll remain the global reserve currency, from what has been since 1971 the primary reserve asset of the world, which are treasury bonds. Right. And the way the system has basically worked since 1971, and in particular since post-82, is that we have subjugated the U.S. defense industrial base, the U.S. middle and working classes, to support the value of the U.S. bond market on a real basis, because our biggest export were treasury bonds. It was great for Wall Street. It was great for Washington bureaucrats. That's what we exported. That system made sense. Quite frankly, from 71 to 89, it was critical in helping us win the Cold War. It was a big deal. After 89, when the USSR collapsed, we should have restructured the deal basically at that point. We did not, and instead we went NAFTA, and we went to China, you got China in the WTO. The net of it is that having the treasury bond as a primary reserve asset is no longer the asset. In fact, it's become a threat to national security.
Exactly. It's wiser to export steel and automobiles and refrigerators and not debt. I think in retrospect. Luke Groman, I appreciate your analysis. Thank you. So in doing that segment, we kind of took a break from what has got to be the news of the week, month, year, which is that Donald Trump is the Republican presidential frontrunner, and he was arraigned yesterday, and the coverage of that has dominated absolutely everything. And so we want to begin tonight with Fox's Kevin Corke, who's been monitoring the fallout from yesterday. Hey, Kevin.
Evening, Tucker. Supporters of the former president have not only given him a boost in recent polling, you and I have talked about that, they're also giving his campaign coffers quite a boost as well. In fact, the move by the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, to indict President Trump has both incensed and apparently inspired supporters of the 45th president. And apparently Team Trump is reveling in the rising tide of cash, raising at least $10 million since the indictment, including a stunning $4 million in the first 24 hours. And this is key. According to the Trump folks, around 25% of those who've actually given during this wave are first-time donors. What's more, some 16,000 people, Tucker, have actually signed up to be volunteers. Again, much of that in the first 24 hours following the indictment. And in yet another sign that the former president still packs quite a punch, especially when it comes to TV ratings. Last night's speech at Mar-a-Lago, aired right here on Fox in its entirety, drew 6.6 million viewers. That's more than double our closest competition, and more viewers in the key demo than other news networks combined, which happens a lot at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Tucker?
A lot of interest in that story, for sure.
Yeah.
Kevin Cork, thanks for that update. Appreciate it.
You bet.
So, as you probably saw, there was total chaos in New York City yesterday as Donald Trump turned himself in. I want to speak to someone who was on the ground there and then in Florida for his speech last night. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia joins us next. In the United States and really around the world, the last 24 hours have been dominated by conversation and reporting on the indictment of Donald Trump, but almost nowhere do you hear an analysis of what's in the indictment. You should look at it yourself. It's fascinating. There's nothing there. It doesn't list the crime that Donald Trump was supposedly concealing. Now, why is that significant? Because that crime allows the prosecutor to transform misdemeanors into 34 felony charges. It's Jesus in the loaves. Like out of nowhere, they multiply. How is that possible? Stephen Miller is a former advisor to Donald Trump. He's the founder of America First Legal. He joins us tonight to assess. Stephen Miller, thanks so much for coming on. I don't hear anyone talking about what's in the indictment, which is a little weird in a country governed by the rule of law.
Well, that's exactly right. And even repressive foreign adversaries of the United States, if they were going to persecute a chief political rival, would create a far more plausible and credible pretext for doing so. What's so remarkable, Tucker, is that the Manhattan DA's office felt completely confident that if they charged President Trump without even naming the law that he broke, that there would be no consequences for them, for their office, or anyone in their employ. They could continue on their merry way, become rich and famous, have wonderful careers, and practice law to great esteem all over the country and probably get some great book deals in the process. And the worst part is, Tucker, they're almost certainly correct in that assumption.
Well, that's the scariest part. I mean, if they'd accused him of murder or fentanyl dealing, opening the southern border and letting 100,000 Americans die of drug ODs or, actual crimes, at least you would understand why he was indicted. But you're right. This suggests they don't care what it looks like.
Yeah, the reality, Tucker, is that we've entered an era now where our system of law has been completely overtaken by radical left-wing warriors who use the law as an instrument to extract political consequences and to inflict political pain on their opponents. So our legal system has become completely tribalized and radicalized. This is something that George Washington warned about way back in his farewell address. When you have a society that becomes factionalized and is one faction versus another, then you are quickly on the road to despotism. The great failure of the conservative movement, Tucker, is its phony belief that words alone will protect us. Look, Iraq has a constitution similar to ours. Countries all around the world have words on paper that are very much the same as ours, fashioned after ours. And those people in those countries have no safety and no liberty and no justice because it is tribe versus tribe, Sunni versus Shia. The words do not protect us. Men of honor and decency and valor protect us. So when you have law schools and you have judges and you have DAs and you have attorney generals who reject the entire Western system of law, the words on the paper mean nothing. They will not protect you. They will not protect your family. They will not protect the country. And unless conservatives and Republicans get serious about understanding the scope and nature of this threat and stop just tweeting about it and memeing about it and talking about it and understand the scope of reaction that will be necessary to reclaim our legal system, then we're not only going to lose this fight, we're going to lose the whole entire country in the process.
Yeah. We need to take a big field trip to South Africa and see how that's doing. Almost 30 years later, their new constitution. Is it a free country, really? Would you want to live there? Stephen Miller, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
The sitting member, an elected member of the Congress, everyone can see where this is going. Marjorie Taylor Greene joins us tonight to recount what she saw in New York yesterday. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on. What was that like?
Well, it was absolute chaos, and that's what the mayor of New York City wanted to happen to me. You see, he threatened me and basically put out a dog whistle for violence against me. And then there was a funded text alert that went out naming me by name and telling people to do exactly what that man was doing, hand out whistles and try to create a chaotic scene of violence and assault. And that's against the law, by the way, Tucker. You see, they didn't want me to be able to protest and use my First Amendment Amendment rights. And they wanted violence. I think they wanted that to happen because they want to repeat January 6th all over again. They want all of us Trump supporters, MAGA, basically Republicans and just good Americans to look like criminals. And that's what they do in communist countries. And that's actually what we're seeing today.
Well, the first thing to do, of course, is take away your freedom to speak. And if you can't say what you really think, then you're not a free person, you're a slave. And once you are, then there's really nothing they can't do to you. Do you think people understand the implications of not allowing someone to speak?
I don't think they do. I don't think people realize what dangerous times we're living in. You see, the Democrat Party, they're the fascists. They want to cancel our voices. They want to censor us, and they want to completely force us into complying. You see, the reason why they're prosecuting, or should we say persecuting, Donald Trump is for the crime of actually winning the 2016 presidential election. That's what they're in hysterics over, and they've never gotten over it. But what they really want to do is once they remove their top political opponent, which is President Trump, they're going to come after all of us. This has happened repeatedly throughout history, and people need to wake up to the reality of the danger we're living in.
Really quick, since you were just there, but Mayor Adams described New York as, quote, his home. How did his home look? Pretty neat and tidy?
No, his home is disgusting. I compared it to what I called Gotham City. The streets are filthy. They're covered with people basically dying on drugs. They can't even stand up. They're falling over. There's so much crime in the city. I can't comprehend how people live there. It was repulsive. It smells bad. And I think it's a terrible place.
Yeah, with some nice people. I will say that. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, just back from New York. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tucker.
So the power of the media and politicians to ignore physical reality right in front of them never ceases to astound us. San Francisco, the prettiest country, naturally the prettiest country in this country, city, is now completely dangerous and drug infested. And if you don't believe that, you should know that a tech executive, a fairly famous one, was just murdered there yesterday. We'll speak to someone who's been trying to sound the alarm on San Francisco, and so far has been ignored. We'll be right back. Poor Chicago, really one of the great cities in the world, living under Lori Lightfoot and suffering. She got bounced out in the primary, and then last night, tragically, voters in that city elected a guy who's even worse. The new mayor will be called Brandon Johnson. He's an open racist who believes in defunding the police, even though crime is up more than 60% this year. I'm not overstating it. Here he is today.
If we are just simply looking at putting more money into policing, that has demonstrated to be a strategy that is certainly short-sighted. The comprehensive approach that we have put forth is something that the city of Chicago overwhelmingly embraced. And again, it's a testament to what can happen around the country.
That's just embarrassing. Can't even speak a grammatical sentence, and he's all in on defunding the police as, like, productive people of all races are fleeing the city as they're boarding up the loop. This is insane. That guy's now the mayor of Chicago. Very sad. Someone should think about how that happened, by the way, and also think about what happened in Wisconsin. That state has just fallen under Democratic Party control of the Supreme Court. The Soros-funded candidate won. And that means, among other things, that voter ID laws will be struck down before the next election in a swing state. Okay, Francie Hakes is a former state and federal prosecutor. She joins us tonight for an extremely depressing segment. Francie Hakes, thanks so much for coming on. These seem like significant election results.
Well, I think they're really significant, Tucker. When you're talking about the mayor of Chicago saying that it's short-sighted to put more police on the street or put more funding into training and recruiting great police officers who could actually solve crime. What is their murder clearance rate in Chicago right now? Something like 20%. That means something like 80% of murders in Chicago, which are way up, go unsolved. How is that helping the citizens of Chicago? I have no idea what he is thinking. I don't know what they're thinking. All I can say is that the voters of Chicago have apparently elected a man that they should have known was a police defunder and therefore is going to do nothing to make that city safe. And I think that the crime is only going to go up.
Yeah, and the guy spent the last couple of days of the campaign attacking whites, like this open racist stuff, and no one ever says anything about that. How is that allowed in America? How can you openly baldly attack an entire racial group in a political campaign, and no one even notices.
Well, of course, we're supposed to have free speech in this country, Tucker, but as you just heard from Marjorie Taylor Greene, it really only seems to go one way. He's allowed to say whatever he wants, but it used to be that if you said something that crazy and that racist, you certainly couldn't get elected dog catcher, much less mayor of Chicago. But here's where we are. He's mayor of Chicago.
Yeah, politicians should never attack any group on the basis of their race. That's just totally immoral. I thought that was the lesson of the civil rights movement, but apparently it works. That's the worst part. That's the scariest part. Francie Hakes, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So you just can't overstate how great San Francisco is fundamentally. It's just beautiful. And unlike so many cities around the country, which lost their manufacturing base, San Francisco never had one, and instead it got like $1 trillion in tech money. So you'd think it would be the greatest city in the world, but it's become one of the worst. Someone should figure out how that happened. The whole city, the Rincon neighborhood in San Francisco, one of the richest neighborhoods in the country. Google has a building there, but it's becoming a slum. On Tuesday morning, the founder of the payments program Cash App, Bob Lee, was stabbed to death apparently on the street. Police still don't know who did it. This kind of thing happens, not always to tech executives, of course, but it happens to normal people all the time. You may remember this video from July, shot by a man called Richie Wynn. It shows what children in San Francisco have to walk past on their way to school. Ricky Wynn is the man who shot that video and has been trying his level best to get people to pay attention to what's happening to his city. He's in San Francisco tonight. He joins us. Ricky, thank you for coming on and for all the noise that you've made about what's going on around you. People seem to be ignoring it. Do you think this murder will wake people up?
I sure hope so. And I just want to send my condolences to the victim's family. You know, it's a horrible tragedy. But I also want to ask the mayor, London Breed, and the governor, Gavin Newsom, how much more anarchy are you going to allow before you put your political pride to the side and take a better look at some of these laws and implementations that you put in place and retract some of them because they're just not working? Californians are tired of being subjected to your social experiments, like defunding the police, like trying to legalize illegal drug use with these safe consumption sites and giving out paraphernalia on the streets. I mean, the word travels fast, and within the criminal community and people that are using, and they're flocking here in what I like to call druggy tourism. Now, I don't know the facts of the case of what happened last night, but you know, it just goes to say that when you turn felonies into misdemeanors, people are going to keep pushing that limit on what they can get away with in the city of San Francisco or in any of these Democratic controlled places. They're just going to keep continuously to push the envelope on what they can get away with. So it's really disheartening to see, and I'm really broken up about my city being in the shambles that it's in right now, because this situation with this individual dying is just going to make the situation just that much more worse. You have to imagine, Tucker, like you said, all the money that the tech executives and the tech industry had put into San Francisco. Who's going to want to come and do a startup in San Francisco now when executives and innovators are getting killed and stabbed in the streets? I mean, it's going to further isolate San Francisco and make people leave, and it's really sad to see.
And people are leaving. So you shot that famous video last summer that was, I think, very shocking for people who aren't familiar with the current state of San Francisco. What did local officials say about that video?
It's been total crickets, Tucker. I mean, nothing. They haven't said anything. None of them will respond to me. I tried to run for a seat in the city council for like re-entry councils to like try to, you know, form or at least give my opinion on some of the things that could help rehabilitate some of the people that are struggling with addiction and some of the people that are coming out of incarceration. And I was met with fierce prejudice. And I mean, they called in and just made up total lies about me and got me ran out of City Hall. So this is my only outlet is my phone.
Yeah. Well, I think history will put you in the hero column. So, Ricky Wynn, thanks for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
So we took Donald Trump's speech live and in full last night from Mar-a-Lago. It came on the day that he was arraigned in New York City, and we're still trying to figure out what all of this means. We couldn't think of anyone better to put it in context than our friend Jason Whitlock. He joins us after the break. A remarkable day yesterday. It felt to many people watching like a turning point in American history. The Republican Party's frontrunner in the upcoming presidential race indicted on charges that didn't seem real. Donald Trump gave a speech last night, which we, as you know, took live from Mar-a-Lago. We're still trying to figure out the implications of all of this, so we thought we would ask Jason Whitlock, who has been thinking a lot about it. He's the host of Fearless, and he joins us tonight. Jason, thank you so much for coming on. And I wanted to talk to you last night. You don't seem to have audio, but I hope without a prompt you can still answer my question. Is Jason Whitlock back? I don't think so.
Yes. Yes.
There he is. Can you hear us, Jason Whitlock?
Yes, I can.
Amen. So what did you think of yesterday?
Tucker, it took me to the Bible, quite honestly. All times are biblical, but man, this really seems like we're in some end times here. And it really took me to 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14 through 18. Verse 14, the Bible talks about you can't have partnership. The righteous can't have partnership with the lawless. And that's not me calling Trump the most righteous person in the world, but anybody looking at this knows that Alvin Bragg and the Democratic and the leftists are lawless. They don't believe in fair justice, equal treatment under the law. They don't believe in that. And so you can't have partnership with them. And then if you go down to verse 17, Paul talks about God's instruction that you got to come out from among them and separate. That's what God instructed. And that's where I think we actually are, Tucker, is these guys are so far removed from the truth, so far removed from any of the values that made this country great. We can't really have partnership with them. And my mindset went to secession, that we have to separate. We have to come out from among them. They're so unrighteous. They're so unclean that, finding common ground is impossible with people who think men can become women, who told us, hey, look, we just want two men to be able to get married, and there's no slippery slope. And that was a lie. And we've seen the slippery slope. Now it's drag queens reading books to kids. Now it's taking kids to drag queen shows. Now it's mutilating kids and infecting them with gender dysphoria and using it as an excuse to cut off their breast or cut off their penis. You can't have peace. You can't have partnership with these people. There are so many lies stacked on top of lies, from the whole Black Lives Matter, George Floyd deal, and the police are just out indiscriminately killing black men and it's so dangerous because of the police. That's all a lie and everybody knows it. We can't find common ground with people who have no respect for the truth, no respect for justice, no respect for fairness. We have to think about going our separate ways. And whether that's through secession or whether that's through some sort of national divorce, it has to be on the table, because you just can't find common ground with people this delusional who think that they're God and they can make up the rules. And so I don't see a pathway forward for those of us that respect America's founding, have traditional values, have a faith in God. We got to separate, and I don't care how it's done, but I just don't see a way to coexist with people this far removed from truth.
I think most decent people, no matter where they live or who they vote for, want to find common ground. I don't see any effort to find common ground from the other side. Do you? Or looking for it, want to see it, and don't see it?
No. And look, there was a time I had many liberal friends that I loved, and I could find common ground with them. But now, if I have to agree that men can get pregnant, I have to agree that children should be subjected to drag queens? Can't do it.
Yeah. Last question. Do you think that there is underneath it all, maybe in hiding, a large group of people who are fundamentally liberals or Democrats who actually do agree with you but are afraid to say so and will at some point, make their voices heard? Or do you think they just don't exist anymore?
I think they exist.